Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku turned his back on All Might? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. You'll never manifest a quirk. You can never be a hero. Crybaby quirkless Deku, you're useless. Give it up. I'm so sorry, Izuku. Deku brought his stuffed toy. What a baby. The brown bunny was torn away from him and tears welled at the edges of his bright green eyes. Why did he have to show up at the park with it? Granted, he was alone and Kaken and his cronies were nowhere in sight. So he thought he was safe. How wrong Midoriya had been. Now his favorite toy, which had been a gift from his mother, was being singed and blackened. His heart wrenches as he tries to get Iki back. Midoriya would spend nights talking out his fears, his problems, and how much he wanted to be a hero, how much he wanted to be like All Might to the stuffed animal. He had even imagined the bunny secretly rooting for him. Iki telling him that he could still do it. Some hero he was if he couldn't even save it from Kaken. Give Iki-chan back, Kaken. He shouted, lunging for the bunny only for it to remain out of arm's reach. Midoriya winced when he realized he let the name slip. He even named it. You really are a baby, Deku. Bakugou tossed it up into the air. The quirky winged child swooped up to catch it and hovered out of arm's reach, dangling the stuffed toy by a limb. Unable to hold it back any longer, Midoriya bursted into tears. This was hopeless. They were going to do something to Iki, he just knew it. Why did he have to be so stupid? Here we go again. He heard Bakugou and the landing of his friend but didn't pay any mind. All he could do was sit there and cry. That was until he felt something soft push against his hands. Midoriya sniffed, rubbing at his blinking eyes before realizing he was staring straight into Iki's muzzle. Here, crybaby. Bakugou held it out even further, motioning for him to take it. Midoriya was slightly bewildered at the sudden change and hesitantly reached out. Were they really giving him back? That little glimmer of hope was blown to pieces in an instant. Bits of singed stuffing and limbs exploding his face. Midoriya froze. He suddenly felt numb, unable to react as Bakugou howled in laughter, his friends quick to join in. You should have seen your face. You really thought I was going to give back your stupid toy? He wiped at his tears, smirking. Well, in one piece anyways. I hate you. Midoriya screamed, even startling himself at the eruption of his anger. Silence. Ruby eyes stared him down, sending chills up his spine. That stupid smirk only grew wider when Midoriya stepped back in fear and clapped his hands over his mouth. He did not mean to say that out loud. Bakugou was going to definitely kill him now. Oh yeah? What you gonna do about it? The blonde child taunted and stepped forward to Midoriya's withdrawal. Nothing. He turned on his heels and ran. I hate them. I hate them. I hate them. More laughter rang in his ears as he ran away. And he kept on running until he made it through the door of his home. Midoriya couldn't even remember going down his street or even making the required turns. All of it was a blur with the hating mantra singing inside his mind. He kicked off his shoes before smacking straight into his mother's legs. Izuku! Inko startled as she almost fell over from the impact. Her son wrapped his arms around her in a tight hug, tears soaking through her breathes. She held her laundry basket up higher, as to not accidentally whack him in the head with it, and wiggled away a bit so she could set it down properly before consoling her child. Inko tried to gently pry him away but to no avail. Izuku, what's wrong? I hate Kaken. Izuku, hate is a very strong word. That's not very nice of you to say. Inko scolded softly, petting his wild green hair. He's not nice. He's a big bully. He blew Iki up. Midoriya pulled away, staring up at her with red eyes and dribbling snot. What could she say to that? Did he now? She was going to have to call Ms. Bakugou. Though it seemed no matter how frequently she did, nothing ever got better. So I hate him. Izuku, finally she grabbed him by the shoulders and forced him back, crouching down so she was face to face to him. You want to be a hero, right? Inko felt awful that she was going to play off his dreams. But she didn't want her son to be filled with hate. With that thought, Inko's heart melted at his messy face. So she began to wipe away the tears and burgers with her sleeve, even plucked a piece of fluff from his hair. Yeah, I want to be like All Might. Midoriya vigorously nodded, sniffling. He wanted to be strong. He didn't want to be scared anymore. A smile on his face as he saved people fearlessly. Okay, so if Kaken was in danger, would you still save him? No, it was a hesitant reply, and he bit his lip in shame. Midoriya's tiny hands scrunched the hem of his shirt nervously. Inko knew her son was a smart boy. He knew where she was getting at. What she didn't know was that he wasn't lying. Well, that's what being a hero means. Heroes save everyone, whether they are mean or not. Life is too precious not to. And that's why they only capture villains. Even if they killed all those people? Even if they killed all those people? Inko echoed in confirmation. She swept his hair behind an ear and sadly smiled. Taking a life should not be taken lightly, even if they are the ones hurting others. Well, I wouldn't hurt Kaken. I just wouldn't save him. Midoriya huffed stubbornly and crossed his arms, pouting. Really, the idea of hurting Bakugou on purpose was ridiculous. Actually, he used to help him all the time. Never got him anywhere with his hot-headed friend though. But that was stopping now. If someone else decided to hurt him, or he fell again, Midoriya wasn't going to his rescue anymore. Not until he learned his lesson. Inko sighed. You know what I meant, Izuku. Now go get changed and washed up. Dinner will be ready soon. She watched as he swerved around her and up the stairs without another word, leaving Inko to mull over the conversation with furrowed eyebrows. I wish you were here, Hisashi. Inko muttered into the phone. She shook her head, peeking around the corner into the living room. All Might's laughter boomed through the speakers of the computer, and Midoriya's green hair bobbed in and out of sight from excitement. He's too hard for me to read. I can never tell what he is thinking anymore. Midoriya Inko felt like she failed as a mother. 6 years later, Midoriya's mind replayed the memory of that day. The class subject had lost his interest, and instead, he mindlessly sketched out designs for his costume. Or that was until his drifted off into the long-ago incident. It was odd. Most of his other memories were a bunch of blurs. Not this one. This one stuck out. Clear as the day it happened. The eraser of his pencil softly hit his notebook slowly, hand pushed against his cheek and green staring out of the window to down below. Perhaps it wasn't as odd as he thought. Actually, the mass of anger spiked whenever he thought about him. Midoriya couldn't even understand why Bakugou wanted to become a hero. There was no rhythm or reason considering his personality. All he was a big bully. A bully who picked on the helpless, quirkless boy. Midoriya hit his forehead against the desk. And Bakugou wasn't the only one. He was a big target for all kinds of bullying. He didn't get it. Is this how society worked? Imagine the other quirkless kids out there. How many of them were going through the same thing as he was? It was entirely unfair to torture someone ruthlessly because they weren't like you. That was always the problem though, wasn't it? A flick of something hard rocketed off his head, causing an undignified squeak to erupt from his throat. Midoriya was on his feet the next moment, face tomato red as his peers bursted into laughter and snickers. Sit down, Mr. Midoriya, and please refrain from dozing. Or next time I'll have you stand out in the hallway, understood? Mrs. Hanaka had her arms crossed, a look of disgust smeared across her face. She was like the rest of her students, always looking down on him. Yes, ma'am. He squeaked out and sat back down just as quickly. She turned back around to continue on with the lesson and didn't even bother to quiet the semi-whispered taunting and jeers. Midoriya bowed his head and curled up in on himself. This wasn't fair. You unfailingly knew that since you were a child. Eyes casted downwards, he bit his tongue to chase those thoughts away. Midoriya couldn't let himself spiral out of internal control. He couldn't give up, he didn't want to give up. But the lead of his pencil scribbled over his sketch, dark lines crossing out the diagram of his costume. You're right. The ringing of the bell snapped him out of his negative stupor, and he gathered for his things slowly, waiting for the other students to leave first. Once the room cleared out, Midoriya swung his pack onto his shoulders and scuffled to the door, peeking out into the corridor. Bakugou was nowhere to be found, for the moment. Deeming it safe enough, Midoriya stepped out and kept his form bent, avoiding eye contact. No one really purposefully seemed out to bully him. And it was usually just Midoriya ending up in the wrong place at the wrong time, which was his DMN luck. However, if he could avoid Bakugou during lunch, and up until the next class starts, it would be one of his better days. Bakugou was always the one instigating it, his confidence causing the others to follow his lead. The ringleader behind the bullying. Some messed up world this was. If that wasn't the makings of a villain, he didn't know what was. It felt like everything was back-ass backwards. Bakugou Katsuki. A hero? Midoriya snorted to himself. Watcha finding so funny there, Deku? He froze up at the all-too-familiar voice behind him, gripping the straps of his pack tightly. Nothing. He could hear snickering coming from Bakugou's groupie. He really did have the worst of luck. Suddenly Midoriya felt a harsh tug at his collar and in a dizzying wham, his back slammed against the wall, red eyes boring into his own. The green-haired boy would have been crying by now, tears at edges of his eyes and down his cheeks. But that was hardly the case. And he knew that even set Bakugou off even more. Shitty munch face, how come I don't believe you? Bakugou sneered. If looks could kill, Midoriya would have been dead 100 times over by now. But the quirkless boy couldn't bring himself to care. Because the instant Bakugou showed up, pushing him around, was the moment when he heard an internal audible snap. Midoriya lugged a hunk of spit, the offending loogie flopping straight onto the blonde's cheek. Bakugou's eyes widened and blinked in shock, suddenly letting go. All eyes were on him now, dead silence as everyone seemed to hold their breaths. Even the onlookers stopped in their tracks in disbelief, watching the scene unfold slowly as they chattered quietly to catch up on what was going on. No way! Did useless Midoriya really just do that? What happened? With twitching lips, Midoriya smiled up at the blonde brightly, before speaking out loudly. I guess you're right, Kaken, you're always right. I just thought the idea of you becoming a hero was hilarious. He cheerfully chimed, rocking back and forth on his heels. Midoriya didn't even know what he was doing, it was just adrenaline and a blur of thoughts that slipped through his lips like water. You being a hero is a joke? The next thing he saw was a fist and a thud of darkness. The cooling sensation placed against the left side of his face caused eyelids to flutter. Disjointed chatter filled his ears. None of it made sense, however, as he was fading in and out of consciousness. He fought to stay asleep. All he wanted to do was stay in that blissful darkness. But his body started to have other ideas. He really needed to pee. With a groan, he slowly allowed himself to regain consciousness, blinking open to the white ceiling above. Where was he at? It took him a good moment in his confusion to realize his left eye wouldn't cooperate. Pain throbbed through the appendage and he hissed, quickly sitting up to feel fabric wrapped around it. Bandages. Midoriya could still trace the swelling underneath. It was that bad. A glance around with his good eye revealed he was in the nurse's office. Though no nurse. What was he even doing here? Then, like a train, his memories came crashing. He mouthed off to Bakugou. He called him a joke. Midoriya grinned. This was the first time Bakugou had hit him like that. He must have struck a nerve. Laughter bubbled in his chest and he clenched at his sides, giggling to himself. The adrenaline was probably still in his system or something, because he felt high. Full of energy, giddiness. Exhilarated. That was the first time he stood up to him, and it felt fantastic. Despite the urge to relieve himself came back and the teenager slid out of bed, a hop to his step while he made his way to the toilet. Even though he knew the hot-headed teenager was going to get away with a slap on the wrist, that didn't bring him down. Even when he knew that's what was wrong with society. Those who had valuable, strong quirks got away with everything or with very little punishment. Those who didn't were stuck as stepping stones. And the quirkless? Considered nothing but dirt. Now wasn't that something? Midoriya laughed again, the noise of flushing water drowning out the sound. Rinsed hands wiped against his black breathes, and hurriedly ran out to scoop up his pack. He wanted to leave before the nurse came back. For the first time too, he was going to skip the rest of school. Checking for the all clear, he quietly shut the door. Everyone should be in class right now. Besides the few wandering students or teachers or course. Luckily he was only on the second floor, so really it should be a piece of cake. One last check, Midoriya booked it down the hallway, stopping at the corner to the flight of stairs. He waited a breath's moment to listen for footsteps. And when he heard none, he glanced over his shoulder and continued on. So far so good. The teenager was out in a flash, escaping through the gates of the middle school and into the street. As the school's building disappeared from sight, he mentally whooped, grinning in victory. Midoriya Izuku was home free. For the day at least. Mom might not be so happy with him if the school calls. That's even if they do. Usually incidents regarding her child was swept under the rug. There really wasn't much use in telling her either. All it did was cause his poor mother more frantic worrying. The last thing he needed was her to turn into a helicopter. Though, it was a wonder why he had so much freedom in the first place. Perhaps because Midoriya swiftly shook those thoughts out. What's been done was done. So he turned to his next course of action. It was time to stake out some truth. Knowing what he knew now, he had a lot more notes to take than he originally thought. He shouldn't have been focusing on just quirks or their capabilities. He needed to take a good extensive look at some personalities. To seek out the truth amongst the lies. That sounded about right. Boom. The explosion reverberated through air, rattling the ground beneath and stumbling the green-haired boy. Midoriya regained his footing from the unnatural quake, looking up towards the city line. Smoke lazily rose from a nearby area as flickers of embers and fire danced into the sky. He wasn't even that far from the school yet. Previously he might have started to panic considering how big that explosion was. There was definitely something huge going down. Was it villains? A gas pipe leak? But judging from the size of the shaking, it had to be something bigger. Maybe a bomb? Whatever it was, the situation only excited him into a jittery muttering fanatic. Midoriya hurried towards the source of fire, weaving through the slow-growing group of citizens pausing on the streets. From the distance he could hear panicked cries and shouts. Police officers have already begun the process of blockading the roads and directing civilians. And fire trucks honked their sirens as they tried to pass through a crowd of idiots who were slow to move. Boom. The quirkless boy faltered at the second explosion, the shaking bringing him to his knees. Breathing, he waited the shockwaves out, screams escalating all around him as people ducked in instinct. Taking the chance, he dashed past the officers who paid him no heed. They were more concerned with trying to keep the public calm and moving them away further from the danger. Just a block down and around the corner, Midoriya skidded to a stop, his heart dropping to his stomach in a cold feeling of dread. The entire street had been desolated. Buildings, apartments and shops, all reduced to nothing but rubble and fire. The level of mass destruction in such a short span was unbelievable. People lost their lives. Midoriya knew. They wouldn't even had any time to run. His legs began to shake, fists clenching as he tried to calm himself down, nails biting into the skin of his palms. His earlier excitement was completely forgotten in the face of the wreckage. Gritting his teeth so hard he felt his jaw straining, helplessness settling on his shoulders heavily. There was nothing he could do. Why was he even here? What a fool he had been, running straight into danger. At this point he would only get in the way. He turned back around. The voice was barely just above a whisper. The quirkless boy stopped, skiing in air as he held his breath in a slight gasp. He waited in hopes that they would speak again, anything to give him a location as to where they were. But nothing. Had it just been his imagination? Hello. He cautiously called. Boom. Look out, kid. A hard feeling of wood wrapping around his waist tugged harshly, his body jerking so fast, Midoriya thought his neck was going to snap. When the blurry movement and short whoosh of air in his ears halted, he caught his bearings, breathing heavily from the bruising pull against his stomach. The spot he was standing in just an instant ago was now occupied by the collapsed building beside it. Sheet, that was too close. The wood vine sat him down gently, though he ended up sitting on the ground then on his feet. A shadow quickly loomed over him and crouched, assessing him for injuries. Midoriya's focus was off. Not to mention the ringing in his ears. His mind couldn't register the hero who saved him until he spoke. "What were you doing just standing there, idiot?" Kamui Wood's glancing lingered on the bandages around Midoriya's eye longer than necessary. Correction. Sidekick. Not quite a pro hero yet. Midoriya stuttered, trying to get his brain to relay the words he required. "I thought I heard someone call for help. They need help." Thinking the kid was still in shock, the sidekick only shook his head. In truth, Kamui thought he had been too late. His fear and adrenaline causing him to speak out harshly. Instead of berating the kid, he should be calming him down. That's more or so the reason why he was still a sidekick. But he was learning. "Breathe. Okay? You're okay." Midoriya's good eye blinked in confusion at the change in tactics. For sure he thought he was going to get chewed out. Instead this just got awkward. He wasn't in shock, was he? Nonetheless his did as he was told, now suddenly embarrassed. "Can you stand?" Kamui got up, holding out hand to help his new charge. "Why, think." Midoriya ignored the offered palm and got up on his own, rubbing at the pain in his neck. His eye remained downcasted, wandering along behind Kamui Woods, ready to tell him someone needed help until he noticed. He lunged forward and tackled the other to the ground, the eruption of flames roaring overhead. Literally it missed by a hair's breadth, the tips of green hair singing. Kamui grunted in surprise as they landed hard on the broken concrete. A dome of wood bursted upwards around the two, shielding them both before the flames had the chance to swallow them up. Kamui didn't do well against fire, however, sweating bullets as he pushed past his limits to thicken their only form of protection as layer after layer disintegrated away with each passing second. "I can't breathe." Midoriya struggled for oxygen in the scorching heat. It was like being in the sauna but 100 times worse. They were practically being cooked alive inside. Relief was instant. The scent of burning wood and crispy unpleasantness wafted into their nostrils, and the teenager clasped a hand around his mouth, gagging. It was the most awful thing he had ever smelt in his life. Kamui pushed him to the side. He was quick to smash an opening in their makeshift shelter, shoving the quirkless boy out weakly. Taking the hint, Midoriya scrambled to his feet to face the fire still blazing upon the dome, careful not to breathe too deeply through his nose at the sweet cold relish of air. A figure from behind the smoke came into view. "What the hell, Endeavor?" Someone angrily shouted, another shadow sprinting into sight beside the fiery hero. "You could have killed them." Backdraft quickly doused the fire and pulled the exhausted sidekick to his feet, throwing an arm around his shoulders to hold his weight. It took everything Kamui Woods had to keep him and the kid alive. But if it wasn't for the boy initially, they would have already been dead if I hadn't intervened. Endeavor's voice was cold and harsh, opposite of what his power represented. Midoriya had been staring at the unfortunate victim of the attack, spinning to face the number 2 hero. The fire user was just as intimidating in person as he was on TV. Flames danced from his chin and eyebrows, lips exhaling steam of heat from the use of his quirk. But he wasn't scared. Midoriya was furious. For the second time that day, the middle schooler didn't think. Any other competent hero would have found another way, instead of putting their allies directly in the line of fire. Unlike you. He hadn't planned for the pun, just sort of happened. Backdraft looked on in bewilderment, unsure if he should step in to calm the rage that was bound to happen. Kamui's chuckle stopped him. "That boy saved both of our lives," he rasped. The pro hero looked to his sidekick and then to the kid facing off against the number 2 hero. Endeavor's nostrils flared and his neck bulged, fury coloring his face red. Arms uncrossed, he stomped straight up, or more like towered over Midoriya, shoulders level and chest puffed out with a sneer. Fists flexed open and closed, reminding him that he was still dealing with a civilian. A child at that. "What do you know, pipsqueak?" The hero pointed behind the teen, speaking near the point of spitting rage. "That villain would have crushed you both. It's that punk's fault for letting his guard down. And this is the thanks I get for saving you both from his mistake? Pathetic." The 12-year-old didn't follow his line of sight, instead standing his ground with his own chest puffed up. He already knew what lied there. The smell of something other than charred wood, a constant reminder. To Backdraft and Kamui, The standoff was a sight to behold. Never have they seen someone stand up to the blazing hero. Let alone a kid. If the situation wasn't what it was, it would have been comical. Now get out of my way, there's more villains for me to catch. And I can't be saving your whiny snot-nosed but all day or we'll never finish up before dinner. Endeavor began to turn away, only to pause when blue eyes caught of a purple wisp. You call that catching villains dash, Midoriya nearly screeched but was cut off at the salty taste of skin brushing against his tongue. A hand as white as sheets clamped around his mouth. Interesting. A voice mumbled against his ear and he tensed. Two other hands gripped around his neck in a choking hold, and before anyone could even blink, the villain had his hostage out of reach, using the warp hole he came through to put some distance between them and the heroes. Now atop the fallen rubble, the hold loosened, allowing Midoriya to cough and sputter for air, but didn't let go. He struggled in his captor's arms, trying to rip the disjointed appendages off unsuccessfully. Shigaraki ignored him. You let your guard down as well, number 2 hero. The villain cackled. Endeavor growled, flames swelling larger in agitation. He's been had, and there was nothing he could do but stand there and eat his words. The fire user knew this villain too. He was actually the one he had been chasing before running into Kamui and the Smartass. The villain's disintegrating quirk was no joke. If that was even the right thing to call it. Feeling helpless now, are we? Shigaraki taunted, a finger caressing down the boy's cheek. Midoriya fought harder, trying to lean away from the sudden touch. Shush, shush, ha, he cooed, grinning behind the makeshift mask of a hand. Don't want my quirk slipping now. The stroking continued, sending shivers down the teenager's spine in disgust. If you want him to remain alive, you'll stand where you are. Any sudden movements, even a twitch, and he'll crumble, understood? Midoriya stopped trying, fear of dying causing his heartbeat to pound relentlessly within his chest. He couldn't see a way out of this. He couldn't do this on his own, and the hero's hands were tied as long as he was captive. His thoughts raced quickly, his eye dashing back from hero to hero and their surroundings. Kamui Woods was out of commission, leaving Backdraft and Endeavor. Their quirks were two complete opposites of each other, so a combined attack would be counterproductive. Even so, they would have only a moment to act before he himself was killed. But wait, that didn't seem right. If the quirk was what it was, how long would it actually take for you to finish me off? You did say crumbling, but in what way? Although I guess it would depend. I haven't seen you use it either, so I can't really calculate or even estimate the time it would take for my entire body to dash. Strange, aren't you? Shigaraki mumbled again, mulling over the kid's capacity to quickly break down the situation. He even pointed out a flaw in his quirk with no real basis for it. Only parts of him would deteriorate in a matter of seconds, the rest would take longer. The boy was calling on his bluff without even knowing it. Midoriya's jaw audibly snapped shut, realizing horror dawning upon him. He had been speaking out loud the entire time in his panic. He really needed to learn to keep his mouth shut sometimes. The villain's grip tightened, blind to the teen's inner crisis. He wasn't focused on his current standoff with the heroes as he should be either. Shigaraki was judging, weighing the pros and cons if he took the chance. With the way the kid had been acting earlier, he hummed. Shigaraki, more heroes are on their way. A silhouette formed from the purple smoking gate, tall beside his comrade. Narrow yellow eyes were the only real defining feature of the vapored figure. We should go, the test was successful anyways. No you don't. Wait. Endeavor charged, flames burning bright and hot as they gathered around his fist in a howling rage, aiming for the teleporter. But Backdraft couldn't stop him in time. The flames erupted out of the portal that popped by him and Kamui instead, devouring the two heroes in a flash of steam and fire. A wall of water rose upwards into sight. The number 2 hero cursed and reeled back his power once he realized his mistake. That warp quirk was a DMN nuisance. Above the steam, Endeavor caught the sound of coughing, indicating to him that the firefighter hero was good for something. Stopping any and most casualties that would have ruined the blazing hero's reputation. Kid! Kamui roared. Midoriya was the last thing the heroes saw disappear through the portal. Midoriya was unceremoniously dropped onto the floor by his kidnapper. He hissed at the pain in his buttocks and scrambled backwards, head banging loudly against the wood wall, a slight cover overhead that shaded him from lit view. He shook from head to toe, swallowing in a nervous gulp as he stared up at his captor. What were they going to do to him? Flashes of his mutilated body streaming across the news, his mother crying, rolled like a cinema in his head. That's probably what. A warning message for the heroes of their failed rescue. What better blow to their reputation than that? That's what I would do after all. The villain barked out in gleeful laughter, startling the poor boy almost into a heart attack. What is this? You think just like a villain too. I was right. I was right. Shiragaki grinned, crouching and leaning forward towards Midoriya, almost hand to face as they stared each other down. One with frightful eyes and the other with childish excitement. I don't get it. The vapored figure popped into view, a humongous black and burnt body collapsing to the ground from a warp gate above, shaking the room with its weight. Why did you take the kid? Because I want to recruit him. There was dead silence, a plan forming into Shiragaki's head as he scratched at his neck, standing and scuffling over to the TV monitor buzzing in the corner. Did you catch that, sensei? Reckless, tell me how you'll convince him to join us? What even is his quirk? Is it useful? The TV spoke out harshly, the voice grating and calculating. Shiragaki paused, frowning. He didn't think that far ahead. After all, he was still a man-child. Easily excited. Easily angered, but he was smart, that's why Sensei wanted him. He was going to have to rectify his small mistake, show him he was right. Tell us, brat. You got a good quirk there, or no? The childlike villain spoke out softly, waiting patiently to be proven a fruitful endeavor. Midoriya, to say the least, was outright confused at his situation. First they held him hostage and now they want him to join them? Superpowered villain was bats hit insane. From the sounds of it, his comrades or whatever thought so too. He missed the question directed at him in his stupor, the vapor dragging him up to his feet with a firm grip on his arm. The boy yelped at the sudden jarring, trying to grip against the smoke but only for his fingers to slip through nothing. No fair. Answer me. Do you have a strong quirk? Shiragaki asked loudly this time, scratching harder at his neck and becoming irritated at the kid's silence. Midoriya bit his lip. What should he tell them? Either way, he was going to end up killed. He didn't want to be a villain. And he doesn't have a quirk. So dead. There, that was all there was to it. Resigning to his fate, Midoriya bowed his head and suddenly found the floorboards interesting. I am quirkless? He barely choked it out and held his breath. His heart was beating so fast in his ears, Midoriya thought it was going to explode and kill him instead. He could feel their eyes intensely boring into him now, and he kept his head down, biting back the tears. His fists clenched and he tensed, suddenly determined to give them one hell of a time. He wasn't going to go down without a fight. He'll go out scratching and kicking, spitting and hissing. Even if it was futile. Really? Shiragaki wrenched the hand mask off his face, letting it clap around his arm instead as he stepped forward, lazily waving at the vapor. Let him go, Kurogiri. Midoriya blanched in surprise, frozen to the spot when the now-named villain did as he was told. He stared at Shiragaki, taking in his white cracked lips and baggy eyes. He looked more terrifying without the hand. What was he up to? Was this it? How awful it must have been for you, the villain mumbled with sympathy. He stared at the bandages, knowing full well how he most likely earned the injury. Society as it is now, I bet you're treated terribly, am I wrong? Shiragaki sounded hurt, boyish and whimpering to himself. He knew what it felt like. To be mistreated, to be outcasted. And now he knew how to coax the boy to see his side. They were the same, he could feel it. Midoriya flinched, gripping at the hem of his blazer and shyly shuffling his feet. He looked down again, avoiding the villain's gaze. He wanted to say, but he couldn't bring himself to. They were the bad guys. They've hurt people. They've killed. Why was he trying to be nice to him? In reality, he should be defying them more. Screaming. Anything. But he couldn't bring himself to do that either. It's all right, kid. Here, sit. What's your name? Kurojairi took over, pulling a stool from the bar out and warping to the other side to grab some glasses. He knew what Shiragaki's game plan was. This couldn't be even more perfect than it already was. Unbeknownst to the manipulation, the teen sat, twiddling his thumbs nervously in the current change of attitude. That was no good. They were going to have to find some way to make him more comfortable around them. Midoriya Izuku? Midoriya wanted to silently scream as he stuttered his name out. What the hell was he doing? He was so confused and conflicted, but they weren't hurting him. They were being kind to him even though he was a useless, quirkless, human being. Were they really that bad? Maybe he should hear them out. Maybe they had good reason to do what they were doing. There's no logic in your reasoning. Weren't they just rough-handling you earlier? Midoriya-kun. The multiple-handed villain tested the name out, taking a seat himself but keeping his distance as to not further scare the boy. I'm Shigaraki Tamura. Tamura is fine. He grinned encouragingly, motioning to the vapor being. And of course, Kurojairi. You can call me Kuro. The purple form set down a mug of whipped cream and hot chocolate, catching the attention of the green-haired boy. He stared wearily at the concoction, turning to the pale man beside him who picked up his own glass. It was odd, watching someone much older than him enjoy the sweet drink. Albeit, he slowly relaxed, itching to reach for the mug but not yet. He needed to know something first. Why me? Midoriya questioned, focusing on the pile of white sweet cream sticking out of the cup. He grabbed at his own arm unconsciously. Why do you want me to join you? I'm weak. Shigaraki set down his mug, tongue swiping out to take in the whipped cream sticking to his lips. He hummed, tapping fingers against the counter and tilting his head to rest against his other hand. Kurojairi settled on turning the tap, washing the dishes they had left in the sink before the mission. Hardly, he rebuked, everything isn't about strength. It's also about your determination and belief, I would like to think. Regardless of our question about your quirk earlier, we would have found a use for it either way. Which was half the truth. The villain glanced to the charred body, thinking that they should probably do something about it soon. What really matters right now is what you believe in. So, tell us. What do you think of our society of heroes? What I think? Midoriya echoed. He chewed on his lip, mulling over his stance. His thoughts from earlier in the day erupting into his mind, reminding him how he got into this scenario in the first place. Well, he began slowly, formulating the words in his head before speaking them. It's unfair, really. I mean, those who are strong step on the weak. And because they have hero-worthy quirks, everyone always turns a blind eye to their horrible personalities. Midoriya gripped at his arm harder, rising anger in his tone. They use their powers to hurt others and yet still say shit like they want to be the #1 hero. He breathed from his rant, hauling back his hate. His eye narrowed, getting a handle of himself and his emotions. It felt good to get that off his chest, the least. And that is why we want you. Our belief is the same. I believe you'll be a valuable asset. He nodded when the boy looked up to him with a hopeful glint. You're quick, clever, and you have that fighting spirit. Quirkless or not. You stood up to Endeavor, of all people, no? Shigaraki mentally grinned. The kid had a lot of hate. Anger. They could teach him how to wield it properly. I want the world to see these people who we call heroes, for what they really are. I want them to see what it's doing to people like us. Those who are stereotyped by their quirks, or trampled on because they are quirkless. The villain paused, his expression serious now for the next piece he was about to say. However, I do have to admit our methods are unorthodox. If you do decide to join us, you'll be fighting against the self-proclaimed good heroes. They don't understand our cause, and they'll call you evil. It will be hard. Shigaraki finished off the rest of his hot chocolate, wiping away the residue smudges from his face with a sleeve. He had a plan. A really good plan if he could convince the kid. If that's a deal breaker, we can protect you. People wouldn't have to know your true identity, and you can freely move about more than any one of us. If you want. Shigaraki let it sink in, watching Midoriya intently as he let the offer hang in the air. The teen was quiet. That was good. Meant he was thinking. He waited patiently, the crackling of the monitor still on in the background. Sensei was still listening in, and he knew he secretly approved judging by his quietness, allowing his student to work his magic. Finally, the kid moved, scooting back his stool and standing. To face the villain, fierce determination in his green eye. Midoriya brought a hand up to brush against the rough fabric of his wrap. He steeled himself, prepared to take on the world. If they didn't step up and do something to stop the way things were heading, the Quirkless would have no future. He was being handed chance to change that, for himself and for the downtrodden. Shigaraki was right. People may get hurt along the way, but it would all be for the greater good. For the greater good. Sure, I'll join you, Tamura-san. The villain smiled wickedly at his acceptance, holding out a hand. The teen accepted the offered palm and shook it in agreement. It was a hearty grip. Welcome to the Villain Alliance, Midoriya-kun. Shigaraki got to his feet and let go, spinning on his heels and motioning for the boy to follow him. Now, let's get you a quirk. The look on the boy's face was priceless. Butterflies in his stomach, he followed him down the poor-lit stairs, hand against the wall. What did he mean get a quirk? There was no way. Not unless. Midoriya couldn't help the twitch of a smile on his lips, a rush of giddiness blossoming in his chest. They reached a metal-rusted door and Shigaraki wrenched the bolt open, pushing it to reveal a wide, dark room. In the center sat a bed. A lump of a shadow gave way to the fact that someone was resting upon it. Beep. Beep. Sensei, what do you think? Midoriya couldn't see him very well, but nonetheless straightened up, nervous about what was about to transpire. Could this sensei really give him a quirk? Was that because he had a quirk that allowed him to? Never has he heard of something like that. It was unbelievable. But it was the only assumption he could make given the circumstance. What's your plan? Like I said, we'll hide his identity. After you bestow him with a quirk, we'll knock him out and ditch him in some alley somewhere. The villain moved closer to Sensei, placing his father's hand back onto his face and looking to the boy as he spoke. From then on, he'll meet with us secretly. We'll train him how to fight and turn him into a spy. Shigaraki's voice suddenly pitched into delight, and then he can apply to UA. The hodgepodge of fledgling heroes. That's where the real fun will begin. What? To UA? Really? Midoriya squeaked. He was going to spy for them at UA? He nearly fainted at the thought. Sure, his dream was coming true in a very roundabout way, but could he really do it? Could he really get in? Shigaraki continued, your job would not only be to gather intel, but also to catch All Might's attention. He's crucial to our plans. It will be tricky, but I have a feeling you'll manage just fine. Oh boy. Excuse me. Midoriya trembled, the daunting task set before him causing both nervous shivers and excitement. What does this have to do with All Might? Why did they want to go after his favorite hero? For as smart as the boy was, he could be really oblivious sometimes. He's the #1 hero, is he not? As the main symbol of heroes, he will unfortunately have to be taken down. Sensei answered him, his hidden form leaning forward to reveal his disfigurations. Midoriya cut off the scream in his throat, instead clasping hands over his mouth in a large gasp. Ugly scars of skin tissue wrapped around his face. Scratch that, he had no face. No eyes, no nose. The only thing left were his lips, the rest warped and scarred. What happened? But he's also the symbol of peace? He didn't mean for it to come out as a question, trying to stop his fear-filled stuttering. This man was going to help him. They were going to be working together. He couldn't be scared of him if Sensei was willing to trust him with such an important task. Trues. But we must first rip out the current foundations if we are to rebuild it. The quickest way to do that is to kill All Might. Kill All Might? Was that even possible? Midoriya wasn't sure how to feel about that. He's idolized him all his life. He's always saved people, was always kind and righteous. He couldn't vouch for many of the other heroes, but he's watched All Might since he was a kid and definitely could say he was good. Plus, never mind that All Might is in America. How are we going to get to him if I also have to spy at UA-? We've got word that he is coming to Japan to be a teacher at UA. Shigaraki cut him off. Granted, it won't be for another few years, but our source can be trusted. He will come. He eyed the boy, reading Midoriya's hesitance stiffening in his limbs. He was unsure. I know it may feel disconcerting, killing someone who's only done good in this world. However, All Might encourages the current situation as it stands. Action may speak louder, but words cannot be ignored either. Shigaraki was right. He knew he was right. Like he said, he's watched All Might all his life. He remembers everything the pro has said on TV. Anyone can be a hero. Midoriya whispered. His fists clenched, readying himself to take the challenging task ahead. He pushed the ache in his chest away. It was going to hurt, he knew, but they were right. It was a sacrifice that had to be made. If things were going to change, the old had to make way for the new. Even if it meant, there's no logic in your reasoning. You'll never manifest a quirk. You can never be a hero. Crybaby quirkless Deku, you're useless. Give it up. I'm so sorry, Izuku. No, there is. Excellent. Shigaraki grinned. Perhaps they should also teach the boy on how to keep his thoughts to himself. As entertaining as it was to watch him speak in third person, it was a bit creepy. Even for him. Let us commence. Chattering voices echoed all around in the free PRD of the classroom. There was one particular conversation going on, however, that caught Midoriya's interest, listening in closely to the comments of odd specters at a video on their phone, one that had gone viral 2 years ago. He still couldn't believe that it was still going around, the few glances from before, turning into frequent ones at him from his amazed peers. He focused, playing with the uneven surface of a pebble underneath his desk, lazily sketching heroes and notes in his journal. And they found him after that? Yeah, knocked out cold in some trash. Can't believe it, I would have sheet my breathes. Me too. Someone else agreed. Midoriya smirked, turning away to hide it. The video, the one dubbed the Kid Hero, after the infamous hero incident people have, none too fondly, nicknamed the mass leveling in Mizudafu, right near this Urudra Junior High, was somehow caught on cam of a cell phone. The footage was rocky, but it was clear enough to record a certain 12 years old heroics and standoff with Endeavor. There was a lot of steam, but they managed up to the hostage situation before it ended abruptly. Eyewitness and those involved had to fill in the rest of the story, much to the number 2 hero's chagrin. How or when they gathered such an audience, Midoriya didn't know. He was too caught up being held captive after all. Though he did have a feeling on who seized the scene on tape, not that they were about to admit it any time soon, regardless of Midoriya's confrontation with him on the matter. Oh well. He really didn't care. The footage did its job undermining the blazing hero's reputation. That's all that had really mattered to him after the sheet Endeavor pulled. On the flip side, he was grateful to the number 2 hero. It was his failures that had gotten Midoriya kidnapped, and if it wasn't for that, he wouldn't be where he was at today. With a glorious quirk. The tiny rock fell with a small clatter at the ringing of the bell, Midoriya standing to gather his stuff and taking his leave of the room. He was the first out, leaving his peers to gap at his back when he shoved his way through the hallway crowd. The other convenient attribute to the video circling around, it had gotten the other students to leave him alone. All except for one. Bakugou. The blonde seemed to only have gotten angrier. Midoriya's gaze darkened, his nose scrunching upwards nearly into a snarl. If only he could show him. Shigaraki had forbidden him from using his quirk outside anyone else's presence. So for 2 whole years, he did as he was told. He still needed to play the part of a quirkless, timid student. They even refused his requests to go on missions. All he wanted to do was prove himself, maybe show off a little on the side. However, if he blew his cover, that would be the end of that. Game over. Patience, he chided, calming the pent-up energy. He didn't want to end up disappointing Sensei. Besides, the UA entrance exams was drawing nearer with each passing day. Just 6 more months to go. Midoriya-kun. A voice shouted from behind, startling him out of his thoughts at the call of his name. Who? He stopped, turning to catch a side-defying mess of neon orange hair bobbing up and down through the crowd, waving something towards him above the masses of heads. He instantly recognized the item, his journal. Midoriya's heart leaps into his throat. He waited for the other to catch up, backing up against the wall to let others pass and gripping the straps of his bag tightly. He didn't recognize his classmate nor can recall his name, the unfamiliar face bounding into view. He was certainly impressive at first glance, a square strong jaw and muscles stretching the fabric of his uniform tightly. Couldn't he have requested a size up? Oh, thank you so much. I didn't even realize I was missing it. Midoriya sheepishly laughs, reaching for the offered notebook. His classmate smiles with bright teeth. No problem. It looked pretty important with the way you were hunched over it and all, so I figured you would want it back. Yeah, Midoriya trails off awkwardly, tucking the journal into the safety of his bag. He shuffled his feet, orange eyes still staring expectantly at him. I'm sorry, but I can't seem to recall your name. Why he was looking at him like that, he didn't know, but it was starting to make him slightly uncomfortable. Oh, it's Rugaterio Akio? Akio ecstatically shouts. What an odd name. Okay, nice to meet you. Midoriya Izuku, though you seem to have already known that, but yeah, thanks again. Midoriya rushes. Silence ensued as they stared each other down. Is there anything else? What was his issue? He wished he could tell him to hurry and scatter so he could get on with his life. But Midoriya Izuku was known to be polite, so instead he waited. Nope, came the reply with a slight pop. That's it. All right, well, I better get going then, don't want to be late for the next class. Midoriya swiftly excuses himself as nicely as he could, spinning around to speed walk to homeroom. Though he tried his best to ignore it, he could feel Akio following behind, humming to himself in a pleasant tone. To say the least, Midoriya was baffled. Why was he trailing him now? Did he read some of his journal? He hoped not. Even if what he wrote was just harmless information, he didn't want people rifling through his stuff. Just in case there was something that might raise a red flag. But the answer had him mentally slapping himself. They both had the same homeroom, which became apparent when he followed Midoriya straight into the classroom and took a seat for himself in the back. He didn't pay much mind after the initial freakout, spiky blonde hair catching his attention and sobering him up. Kaken. Midoriya greets, sitting behind the explosive teen in his assigned seat. He could literally feel the negative energy emitting from his childhood friend in front. Deku. Bakugou growls. And that was it. No cursing him out, no shouting. Midoriya's eyebrows furrowed. Though it was a nice change in pace from Bakugou's constant nagging, he couldn't help but wonder what the cause for it was. Shrugging to himself, he let be for now. He had more important things to think about. The rest of the day passed quite easily, ending at the ringing of the bell that released the students from a day of learning. The sun was shining and the prospect of getting some training in brought a bit of excitement to Midoriya. That was until he found himself getting dragged out by Bakugou. Kaken? The poor boy squeaks, the collar of his uniform slightly choking him as he was manhandled. He tried to keep up, really he did. But how fast the other was walking, he could barely keep his feet underneath him. After being half dragged across the school and outside, behind the building, Bakugou releases him. The blonde was deathly quiet as he studied him, making Midoriya worry. Never has he seen the hot-tempered teen this silent. You're different, Bakugou finally says, shoving his hands in his pockets with narrowed eyes. Is this what had been bothering him all day? What do you mean? Midoriya blinks, curiosity getting the best of him. Sure, he had a lot more confidence now, but he thought he had been playing still as the shy and anxious person he had been before. Leave it to Bakugou to see right through it. That, right there. Bakugou begins to shout, stepping forward to lean over the other in intimidation. Usually you're a shitty quivering mess of snot, but instead here you are, no nervous stutter, no nothing, not even when I dragged you all the way here. An explosion of smoke went off in his pocket, Bakugou quick to pull his hand out before he further damaged his clothing. Anger boiled. Oh, it's been 2 years and now you've decided to confront me about it? Midoriya's voice raised to match the other, fists clenched. You really think I could go back to being such a baby after that? He snorts, you really need to pull your head out of your butt, Kaken. It's not just about confidence, Midoriya. Bakugou roars. Midoriya's mouth shut right up, green eyes going wide as saucers at the use of his name. He had no clue what was going on anymore. That was the first time he hasn't called him Deku. I could give 2 sheets about that day. As much as it set me off. I don't understand where you're getting at then, Kaken. Midoriya interrupted him, shaking in visible rage. You're the one who's hurt me a million times over, so what do you care now how I act? So what if I'm different? At least I'm not some shitty bully who has an inferiority complex. Dead silence. I don't know where you got the idea that I was always looking down on you, when I was only trying to help. But I came to realize one day, trying to help you meant allowing you to push me around. Midoriya took slow steps further forward, glaring up at Bakugou, who retreats back in surprise. He would have laughed at the fact that he was the one now intimidating him. That is if he wasn't so angry. And you know what? I don't have to act better than you. Midoriya stopped his advances when he corners him against the wall and grins, showing off white teeth. I've always been better than you, Bakugou. Without another word, Midoriya backed off, spins around and leaves the blonde to slide down in complete shock. Kakin can go F himself. He mentally screeches when he enters the courtyard, the rage still bubbling in his system. Some students suddenly startled, scrambling to avoid his path of stomping anger. He needed to blow off steam before he did something stupid, like accidentally activating his quirk in front of everybody. Thank God school was over. Midoriya breaks out into a sprint, wanting to be anywhere else but here. At least it was the weekend, which meant he had time before he had to face Bakugou again on Monday. Hopefully this time he got the message and would decide to finally leave him the F alone. Whenever there was a crowd, there was always a villain, accompanied usually with some smashing noise and disgruntled screaming. It was a sort of call to Midoriya to come running, eyes alight with awe and joy. Those times have dwindled. Plus, he had only been passing by when he ran into the incident, a monster form of a villain throwing a tantrum on the train tracks and disrupting the peace. Instantly he recognizes the hero currently duking it out. Kamui Woods. Interest piqued, he pushed through the crowd. Even after the hero incident, Kamui's popularity soared, finally earning himself the title of a pro-hero a few months ago. He was an upcoming rising star, and from what Midoriya remembered, had vastly improved in the use of his quirk. Despite how polite Kamui had seemed, he didn't speak a word to Midoriya after they found him. The sidekick back then had felt guilty, Midoriya knew it. He smirks, satisfied enough with the fight and boredom settling in, he left the scene, the crowd cheering at the victory of Milady, who stole the show from Kamui. There was no need to stay and analyze the newbie. Midoriya already had her quirk broken down, which the ability itself was incredibly simple. Easy enough that it wasn't necessary to jot it. Still, could be a threat though. Maybe I'll draw up some scenarios and ways to counter it later on. He mumbles. Shigaraki would be pleased that he already had shown some light on their newest enemy. Lost in thought, Midoriya hadn't realized he was making his way through the underpass already. Only when he heard an echoing clang from behind him did he pause, head swiveling to catch something green and slime-like, the sensation of gooiness erupting around him. Oh! The slime chimes, suffocating him. Got myself a good disguise here. Midoriya's fingers claw at the slippery skin, trying to tear it off as it shoves its slime deep into his throat. He couldn't breathe, gagging on the appendage and sking the life force out of him. This was just all so wrong. Sheet. He had let his guard down. Could he still do it? If I don't try, I'll be dead. With frantic eyes, Midoriya did a quick glance, trying to make heads or tails if there was anyone else nearby. But he couldn't. Screw it. The thrum of power pulsed in his veins, revving it to full throttle, and he braces himself to the Texxawa's smasish. Midoriya slammed the brakes down hard on his quirk, feeling himself disappear only for a fleeting moment before snapping back around in full circle. With the amount of goo flying everywhere from the shockwave, he hoped it obscured his savior's view from the glitch-like movement he no doubt produced. Crashing to the ground and rolling, he suddenly feels sick, nearly blacking out from the 180 spin he did with his power. He rotates onto his hands and knees, dry heaves, and coughs gunks of spit onto the concrete, trying to clear the remnants of slime that clung to his tongue and throat. "You all right there, my boy?" A voice boomed. He knew that voice. No, I'm not all right. I basically gave some FING villain a BLWJB, Midoriya bit back the snarky retort, instead wiping his mouth against his sleeve. When he became so crude, he didn't know. What he did know was that no amount of brushing was going to get rid of that motherfucker's disgusting taste. The realization dawns on him like some heavenly chorus. All Might? Midoriya scrambles to his feet, gaping at the towering pro-hero who had just saved his life. Technically, he sort of had things under control and would have gotten away, maybe. Yes. It is I. All Might poses proudly, breaking out into his signature laughter. There is nothing to fear now, my boy. I have apprehended the villain. He suddenly holds out 2 plastic liters of bottled green. Disgustingly, he could see the eyeballs floating in there. When did he? I'm glad to see you are safe. My deepest apologies, I let him get away the first time, which resulted in your capture. All Might admits, stuffing the liters into his large pockets. Admiration bloomed in his chest. All Might, in the flesh, standing before him and terrifying, but that wasn't what mattered. He certainly looked different on TV than in real life, but like he said, didn't matter anyways. Not only was All Might his idol, here stood his enemy. This was his chance. A head start. He knew exactly how to play this. Itrialius you, holokrapai my or begestfin, and du just saved mesha thank you so much? Midoriya babbles in one breath, bowing repeatedly and reverting to his dorky harmless self. Actually, he probably didn't have to force himself too much. This was like riding a bicycle. No need to say thank you please. Like I said, I was in the fault. All Might says and sheepishly waves a hand, trying to calm him before he hurts himself. Okay, maybe he hasn't gotten rid of his hope about All Might. This was even excessive for him, and the great thing about it was that he couldn't help himself. Midoriya opens his mouth to speak, calming down, but anyways, I better run. Got to turn this guy over to the police and all. The #1 hero turns out from the tunnel, stretching in the sun and oblivious to the boy's now panicking state. His limbs nearly freeze up at the sudden abruptness, but Midoriya forces himself to run out after him. He'll be dead if he let him get away before he could get a word in. In one desperate grab, before Midoriya could even think how much of a bad idea this was, he was clinging to the pro-hero's breathes in a fearful scream, legs flailing in the air as the two shot off high into the sky. What the hell, kid? All Might grabs a fistful of Midoriya's uniform to keep him from slipping off. His first instinct had been to push him off, but the result wouldn't have been pretty, considering how high up they were flying over the city now. Really? Sometimes he could be quite stupid. I wanted to ask something, Midoriya struggles to say. His cheeks were flapping all over the place, making it difficult for him to talk. All right. Close your mouth. Midoriya did as he was told, the free fall butterflies immediate. The impact reverberated in his bones when they landed on top a roof, All Might leaving an impressive dent. Midoriya lets go, taking deep breaths to get his racing heart under control. He was not in a hurry to do that again. Really, my boy? I don't have time to dawdle. All Might couldn't understand what the kid wanted. He tried to make his escape when blood dribbled from between his teeth, his back turned and ready to take flight. Can anyone really be a hero? All Might stills. Was that it? Of course. Can someone without a quirk, like me, become a pro-hero like you? Midoriya cuts him off, voice trembling. His head was bowed and face hidden beneath his hair, hiding the smirk that exposed the lie, contrary to the nervousness he was playing. This was the moment of truth. There was an incredibly long pause of silence, and finally, wondering what was taking so long, Midoriya raised his head to the steam that expelled dramatically from nowhere. Icha? In the midst of it all, hunched a scrawny lanky human, his clothing nearly dangling off his form. His thin arms raised half-heartedly, peering at him with shallow blue eyes and a frown. If there was one word to describe this person now standing before him, was, well, pathetic. So it gave good reason for Midoriya to assume that this guy here, right now, was not in fact All Might, but someone else who had come wandering up, and that the real All Might had in fact fled without his notice. Who are you? Midoriya deadpants, disappointment written all over his face at the chance he let slip through his fingers. How could he have not heard All Might's escape? Or even this guy now standing in his place? I'm All Might. Wait, what? He questions, his voice pitching a notch higher than he liked. It couldn't be. This couldn't be the #1 hero. Though he had to admit, the blonde hair and saggy bangs looked eerily similar to. I'm like the deflated version of fake muscles, really? All Might explained, resigning to his fate. Besides, the need for urgency was gone. The cat was out of the bag, so he might as well before he was bombarded with a million of questions. Why did it have to be this kid? Maybe this was a good opportunity to bring a bit realism to his dream, though. All Might sat and brushed a hand through his scraggly hair, lifting up his white shirt and revealing the bruised, dented side of his stomach to Midoriya. He heard a sharp gasp, his blue eyes locking onto the boy who stared in disbelief at his permanent injury. This is the reason for my state. I lost a chunk of my stomach and some internal organs to a villain a few years back. Midoriya actually heard of that, he was pretty sure. The Alliance networked with some criminals in America, and have mentioned of a huge fight that went down between the #1 hero and some villain. Shigaraki failed to mention the name of the villain, nor did he say that All Might had been hurt this badly. That's even if he knew. They might not know, and with this piece of information. So I cannot say that someone without a quirk can become a hero, not when we are putting our lives at risk every single day. This is proof of that. All Might lets his shirt fall, and I'm a pro hero. Imagine how it could have turned out for someone without a quirk, kid. Midoriya's heart panged, hurt. What if he had still been quirkless? What if he still had ran into All Might like this, only for his dreams to be dashed by the idol he's admired all his life? So anyone can become a hero, as long as they have a quirk. All Might had lied. He must have been only trying to make himself look good. Oh, Midoriya wasn't sure if he was still acting or not, trembling to hold back the tears. Guess All Might really was like everyone else. That little bit of hope had been smashed into dust, even when he had thought he prepared himself for the endgame. So much for that. You can become a police officer, though maybe a detective. Both are still admirable positions. All Might stood, dusting off his breaths and making way to the door that led off the roof. I can even introduce you to someone I know in the field, he's a good friend of mine. He patted Midoriya's shoulder as he passed by. If you would like? No, Midoriya shrugged off the gesture, stepping away and casting his gaze to the ground. Then, All Might pulled away, going for the knob of the door. He almost forgot. Also, one little thing. He remained facing to the door, unable to face the teen's hopes he crushed. Please don't tell anyone about this, not even your friends. I can't have word of my poor state getting out. Then he was gone. Midoriya sniffed, suddenly breaking out into giggles that turned into a full-blown chortle. He wheezed, unable to regain his composure, his stomach and sides beginning to ache. He stuffed a knuckle into his mouth, sinking teeth into skin as he tried to stifle his laughter, drawing blood that lazily began to drip down his hand. Are you kidding me? He laughs, wiping at tears. Midoriya didn't care about the blood that streaked across his cheeks from the motion. Now why wouldn't a villain want to do that? All Might was halfway down the stairwell before he realized one very important factor. Large hands patted against his pockets, noticing that the hard crinkle of plastic that should be there was well gone. Oh no, he groaned, rubbing a hand down his face. The bottles must have fell out when the kid was scrabbling against him in the air. How could he have been so careless? All Might added that to the growing list of mistakes. If only he hadn't been so focused on trying to escape the kid's presence, none of the things above would have happened. He slammed a fist against the wall. A large exploding BAM detonated in the far-off distance, catching the pro-hero's attention through the window's view. All Might was out of time. However, that didn't stop him from hurrying to the scene just a few blocks away. He had to see it with his own eyes. See his failures wreaking havoc in the streets. Midoriya, on the other hand, took his time. He was currently leaning against the railing, placed to keep wandering souls from accidentally slipping off the edge. Green eyes scanned the distance for the fire that erupted not too far from here, and contemplation took its course as he hummed, tilting his head in observation. Another villain? They have been quite active today. Mindlessly, he picks at the bandages wrapped around his hand. He always carried some with him in case of accidents, mostly with Bakugou, and never shook the habit. Turns out it was a good thing too, or his mother would wonder where he received the bite mark. He could try passing it off as a dog's, but they weren't sharp enough for it. Alas, should he go? Probably. Considering MT Lady, there might be another new hero looking to debut today. After that, he could then report to Shigaraki. All in all, he felt no rush to relay some good news. They had all the time in the world, while All Might's was ticking down for him. HM? Hey, what are you doing? No one's allowed roof access, huh? The security guard scratched his head when he opened the door wider to nothing. He could have sworn he saw a shadowed figure standing near the rails initially. Maybe a trick of the light or something. Unbeknownst to him, Midoriya laughed when he bleeped out of existence, catching the confusion adorned on the officer's face, before his scene shifted entirely to a dark and trash-filled alleyway. This spot was one who he knew very well, and the only alley he's touched so far. He probably should make it a point to go around and mark more, if he wanted more access to the hidden parts of the city. A small meow gained his attention, a black cat sitting atop one of the garbage lids. Midoriya considered the creature for a long moment, then placed a finger against his lips at the poor animal. Shoo, don't tell Tamura-sen. Petted once, the cat flicked its tail in annoyance at Midoriya's disappearance into thin air. He knew he could get in trouble if Sensei found out he was using his quirk right now, when he appeared in a bathroom stall and dashed out, startling some guy who was at a urinal. What the look at what you made me do? But he had something that would make up for his one-time disobedience. The door slammed shut on the shout, Midoriya giggling quietly as he weaved through his favorite fast food restaurant that was McDonald's. This one so happened to be on the same street of the marketplace he scoped out earlier on the roof. He knew the layout of the city like the back of his hand, hours of committing to memorizing streets, landmarks, and businesses now finally paying off. Outside, a crowd, as per usual, had gathered further down the street, the niche of the market utterly engulfed in fire and smoke. Firecracker-like sounds went off in intervals, someone screaming with a hoarse voice and AF off when Midoriya finally arrived on the scene. He could recognize that voice anywhere, the same cursing and yelling having followed him everywhere throughout his life. So he didn't have to see the blonde spiky hair jutting out of the slime's body, nor the distressed red eyes at the suffocation that the captor was experiencing, to know it was Bakugou. Trapped like Midoriya had been earlier. Oh, this was too good to be true. Granted, he didn't like the idea of that motherfucker escaping, though when the villain made his disappearing act, he could take a gander. When Midoriya decided to catch a ride on All Might. Judging from the way the current on-scene heroes were acting, there was nothing they could do either. 4 pro heroes, all right now, incompetent to even try and rescue the boy who was suffering as the slime's hostage. What a bunch of bullshit. They tried only once, then decided to back off and wait for someone with a more plausible quirk to come along? To Midoriya's delight, Bakugou would be dead by then. Sure, the minefield play coming into effect made it all the more dangerous, but what was it that All Might said? Pro heroes risked their lives. And they sure as hell weren't risking them now. This isn't looking too good, someone mutters, the quiet whispers of dread conversing all around Midoriya. He sat back, enjoying the people's faith in those heroes quickly diminishing. Is there really nothing else they can try? Another bystander chips in. Nope. Because in reality, these heroes who you looked up to were all just a bunch of cowards. Something snaps into place in his head when those big red eyes looked straight at him, Bakugou's covered mouth gasping for air in a silent plea. Time stood still and he froze, watching with bated breath in those last seconds of his childhood friend's life. Midoriya ran forward. Midoriya ran forward. Adrenaline pulsed through his entire being, his mind white-hot and blank. He had no questions as to why, dashing past the barricade and Deathgaro who reaches for him a little too late. Stop! The hero shouts, but it falls on deaf ears. Midoriya's hearing consisted with the pounding of his heart, the rest of exploding fire and frustration muted in the background. It felt like he was underwater, too sluggish, his legs wobbly and not pumping fast enough to his sense of urgency. Too slow. Then everything came crashing like a tidal wave, the noise roaring to life in Midoriya's ears as his senses went on high alert. His legs steadied, the screaming of Bakugou in front of him the loudest out of the yelling for his retreat. What are you doing? Do you have a death wish? Midoriya. Stop. Regardless, Midoriya still couldn't make out the jumbled words. None of it had any meaning to the calming blank that had settled in his mind. It was too stubborn to allow anything else but the overwhelming urge to save Kakin. That's right. His hand acted on its own, tugging off his pack before he could even realize what he was doing. The yellow school bag goes flying through the air and straight into the villain's eye, disrupting his hold on Bakugou in surprise and pain, if only for a moment. It was as if the spell had been broken in that instant. When Midoriya's hands came in contact with slime, the question why, now ringing in his head like an alarm. His fingers clawed and scratched, pulling at the goo, and even smashing against the thick substance with his fists in the grim attempt to free Kakin. Bakugou manages, only to be stopped short when his head is pulled back, the mouth of the villain's clamping back over his. Midoriya struggles harder, the slime screeching at him for his interference. "You little sheet dash. I don't know." He answers, ignoring the cursing he was currently on the receiving end of. Truthfully, he couldn't explain it. Why, am I? And then he remembers. He had to do this. "You just dash." Midoriya stops, tears spilling, and swallowing thickly from the dehydrating heat, getting his tongue to function again. "Looked like you were crying out for help." His lips trembled into a crooked grin. "Detroit smamish." The whirlwind of wind slams into Midoriya, feet knocking out from underneath him as he goes flying, clothing flapping wildly. The villain explodes into gunks of goo, unable to keep himself together from the powerful force, and releasing Bakugou into the midst of broken slime, the team gasping loudly for air in the sudden vacuum. Midoriya reaches out, searching for anything to grab onto, only for a large hand to grasp around his arm and Bakugou's, keeping them both grounded from Midoriya's short fear of getting swept away in the chaos. He squeezed his eyes shut. The howling wind ceases. At the calm, Midoriya blinks, taking in the splattered green littering the ground and walls. He can feel the stickiness on him too, but at this moment he didn't really care. All Might's hold on him disappears once he's set on his feet properly, and Midoriya narrows his eyes, honing onto a good chunk of goo next to him on the ground. Spitefully, Midoriya steps on it with his red sneaker, the squelch satisfying. Anger unleashed, he repeatedly stomps on the substance. "Motherfucking B. Go eat shit, you piece of trash of a villain. So fing gross." "Okay. Easy there, my boy." Midoriya slightly deflates when he feels himself get picked up and away from any other pieces that might ensue his wrath. He looks up at All Might, clearly still set off, but is soon wiped away with concern. Red tainted the side of the pro-hero's mouth generously. The American hero looks away, and Midoriya's gaze follows, the large wall of wood enveloping the spot where the bystanders had stood. Kamui Wood's doing. He must have thrown up the shield when All Might came barreling through, protecting the civilians from the gale. A few people have wandered out by now, starstruck and dazed at what had just transpired. With a fist, All Might wipes at the blood and Midoriya turns away, huffing and arms crossed at the sudden eruption of cheering, whoops of joy and delight echoing all around them. At this point, Midoriya just wanted to leave, and intended to do so, sidling away from All Might. Bakugou's stare on him went unnoticed, instead focused on making his escape before anyone realizes who he was. Unfortunately, Midoriya's path became immediately blocked by Kamui Woods. He glares at the hero. "How come you always seem to be in the center of every major incident?" Kamui says first, making to grab at his arm. Midoriya dodges, snarling at the other lowly. He had enough of being manhandled for one day. "Now you're talking to me?" He snarks. What was up with today? First Bakugou, now Kamui? These guys really need to learn how to confront their issues up front instead of waiting for whole fing 2 years. He probably wasn't one to talk, but that was his own issue for another day. He saw Kamui visibly wince, his hand falling back to his side when his attempt failed. The hero glances back to the ambulances and paramedics, the gears churning in his head. Midoriya figured that had been the hero's intention, to get him checked out for injuries, and probably to scold him a little more, which was bullshit. He was going to have none it, and Kamui now knew that as well. "I'm everything all right here?" All Might steps in with a wave, glancing between the both of them in confusion. Midoriya tensed a tad at the booming voice but was thankful for the number 1 hero's timing. He really didn't want to hear anything more. I was just telling Midoriya that he needs to stop throwing himself into danger, Kamui says quickly, turning away to make his leave. He's going to give me ulcers? Midoriya drops his glare elsewhere at that, catching Bakugou staring at him from afar. He could hear the snippets of Deathgoro praising his quirk, but the way Bakugou was looking, he wasn't listening. Of course he'd get praised. Whatever. Midoriya? All Might echoes, watching Kamui's retreating back. Midoriya Izuku? Midoriya snaps to attention at his full name and shrugs, not really feeling up to verbally confirming the pro-hero's question. His thoughts were heavy, loud, and he didn't know what to do with them. All he knew was that he really just wanted to leave and sort his sheet out, the confusion, anxiety, and frustration a whirling mess inside. He wasn't sure how much longer he'll last standing there, waiting for the adults to dismiss him or come yell at him some more, whichever came first. Midoriya was already going to have to explain himself to his mom, to the Villains Alliance, and getting chewed out thrice today was not going to be fun. But Midoriya's could feel his mind unraveling by the second, and the temptation to use his quirk right then and there twitched at his fingertips readily. He wanted to disappear. All Might. Over here. Any comments on your latest exploits? The flood of reporters cornered All Might like a pack of rabid wolves, the pro-hero quick to step in front of Midoriya, shielding him from the rolling cameras and flashing pics. All Might must have picked up on his distress, and Midoriya silently thanked him for the second time that day. A jolt of irritation shot through him. Now he was stuck behind the man who snapped his dreams in half earlier. It was better than facing that mob, Midoriya supposed, so he remained silent, stepping closer to the American hero and peeking slightly around him to watch the onslaught of questions. All Might answered each one patiently, enthusiastically, and even credited the other heroes who had been on the scene before him. The media ate that sheet right up, eager to get more out of the number 1 hero. The flashes of those so-called heroes giving up played in Midoriya's mind. His fists clenched, and he bit his lip, the shyness burning into anger. Green eyes narrowed up at All Might. A bit of the haze cleared. Fuming, Midoriya didn't realize he was moving, looking to challenge the statement All Might had made. The female reporter currently interviewing the hero spotted him first, her jaw slacking into a O when stepped out from the cover of All Might's shadow. Isn't that Dash? Thank you for your hospitality, but I have other matters I must attend to. All Might swiftly dismisses her, and lifts Midoriya who squeaks in protest, the hero restraining him underneath his muscular arm. Midoriya flailed, trying to squeeze out of All Might's grip. He fails. The harsh bellowing wind erupts around him and instantly stilling Midoriya's attempts as he stares at the reporters slowly shrinking in size. He wasn't eager to be the cause of falling to his death due to his struggling. Okay, he had his quirk, but still it wouldn't be a fun adventure. Midoriya looked up to the sunset dimly glaring, the whooshing wind oddly calming compared to his earlier experience. Perhaps it was because he was a bit more prepared this time around, or he was finally able to get away, even though he was still with All Might. That's right. When they descended, well from the main part of the city and the incident, Midoriya pushes away urgently, All Might feeling his resistance and this time letting go, watching cautiously. He stumbles back, breathing heavily as the onslaught of his thoughts came whipping through, his pulse beginning to race and hands shaking. What had he been thinking? Of calm, he was not calm. That was a lie. He hadn't been calm the entire time. What the hell? Midoriya grits out. All of that anger and pain, and he didn't know who he was directing that question to, himself or to All Might. Probably both. I apologize, but I was very well past my limit and I had a feeling you didn't want to be seen, so I just All Might answers in a ramble, sheepishly rubbing at his neck. His form dissipates in a flash of steam, and Midoriya jumps away, momentarily forgetting that this was a thing. The sight of blood spraying from the number 1 hero's mouth was still pretty horrifying. Sorry, the gaunt All Might apologizes, coughing and clearing his throat. The real reason I brought you with me was, well, I wanted to admit that I had been wrong. Whatever else Midoriya had been ready to unleash on the hero was instantly wiped. He blanched, which All Might took his silence to continue. Was this it? Despite lecturing you on the dangers of becoming a hero, I hadn't been putting my preaching into practice. It was wrong of me to belittle you like that, you, who ran in headfirst, even after the pro-heroes failed to put their lives at risk. When I failed to put mine at risk. He paused, watching Midoriya's expression change through a multitude of emotions, his hand grasping at the middle of his blazer tightly. Midoriya didn't know what to think, so he didn't, feeling All Might's word resonating in his chest, bringing the ache he thought he's buried so long ago. It was almost too much to bear. But isn't this what he wanted? Honestly, if you hadn't been there, I wouldn't have ran in there like that. I wouldn't have pushed past my limit to save that young man. The guilt was evident in All Might's voice. We wouldn't be standing here like this if it wasn't for you. Midoriya slowly nodded, choking back a sob and the tears threatening to spill. He didn't want to hear this. His nails dug into the wounds of his hand, pain jolting through his arm and trying to shove his hopes back. Stuff. You moved without thinking, didn't you? He wanted to deny it. Midoriya had already chosen his path, there was no going back now. No, he couldn't let himself get Esekidian like this. He struggled with his emotions, reminding himself that this was all a part of the scheme. That's right. You can become a hero, Midoriya Izuku. Every top hero's origin story has one thing in common. Without thinking, they rushed into danger to help people. But they all say the same thing, their bodies moved by itself. Midoriya mentally grins, pushing his doubts away. There's something you should know about All Might's quirk, Midoriya-kun, Sensei's voice whispers in his ear. Don't tell Shigaraki, this is just between you and me. This is your secret mission. He was going to have to break the slime out one day. Things didn't go entirely according to plan, and even if the villain's tactics had been distasteful, he owed him one. At least they were able to succeed sooner than he expected. And I can help you do it. To gain one for all. One for all, that is the name of my quirk. The ability to pass on cultivated power to another. All Might looks down at him, Midoriya having made his way to his knees, tears freely spilling down his flushed cheeks at the implications. He could have become a hero. If only he had heard that sooner. Please don't get too out of hand. I'd rather not have to use my quirk if I think you're going to kill me. Midoriya quips, the sludge man noisily quivering behind him. Shut up, Pipsqueak. Why you in charge anyways? The sludge convulses in irritation, two white orbs whirling around at Midoriya. This is stupid, having to work with some barely PBS and teen. He gurgles. Midoriya did not like him one bit. Midoriya clicked his tongue in annoyance, dropping to the ground, the air singing behind him having alerted him to the attack. Spinning around, he flicked a pebble past the villain, the sludge's appendage reacting by slamming down, but only for him to WHP through nothing. Midoriya lands behind him. Seriously? He chides, the sludge looking to try and smack him again. Midoriya flips another rock up, aiming directly above the villain and free falls backwards to the ground, the slimy arm side swiping above him as it misses once more. His body rolls over before he hits concrete, Midoriya landing on the sludge heavily, knees on his shoulders instead of the face planting the villain thought was about to occur. The slime freezes at the palm on his forehead, his head pulled back forcefully until he's face to face with Midoriya, the tip of a blade flashing dangerously towards a bulging eye. You're not as invulnerable as you would like to think. Midoriya's lips twitches wide, white teeth showing in his ear-to-ear grin. I'm sure Sensei wouldn't mind if you lost an eye due to insubordination though, if you continue to insist. How did you dash? The sludge shuts it when the blade inches closer. Anyone with half a brain would have figured it out. Midoriya answers anyway despite his threat, sheathing the weapon back at his hip. He hops off, releasing the other and reappearing at the rusty door before the villain could even blink. Do as you're told. The sooner we get this done, the sooner we'll be out of each other's hair. Midoriya lazily waves, letting the door slam shut, pleased with the expression the sludge man currently held. The darkness of the room was deafening, relaxing, Midoriya recalling the memory. It had been great exercising his quirk, showing it off to the idiot, but the villain still continued to test him even after the display of power. He wasn't sure if it was because the villain couldn't figure out his quirk, or if the sludge was just as hot-headed as Bakugou. Midoriya really hoped it was the latter. For his sanity. He couldn't handle stupid. Nonetheless, the sludge did his part, as much as a disaster it had been. Midoriya figured it would have taken a few months to lure All Might, once they caught wind he was here in Japan, but here he was, lying in bed and staring at his hand, the spark of the quirk glowing on his arm, flexing and testing his new power. Like taking candy from a baby. All Might had warned him not to fully use it yet, though. After a short psychical test, the hero had deemed his body strong enough to withstand the quirk. He had actually been clearly impressed with Midoriya's condition, the training he received a blessing in disguise, and allowing him to immediately nab the number 1 hero's power. Even so, Midoriya wasn't at the max fitness, and All Might calculated he might only be able to use about 5% without destroying himself. That powerful, huh? Sensei was going to be most pleased. Midoriya flipped out of bed, the clattering of a coin dropping in the dark and covers flying. In an instant he was behind the intruder, the blade of his knife at their throat. Or where flesh should have been, the wisps of purple smoke convulsing instead in place. Kuro-san, Midoriya breathes out, dropping his stance. Don't do that. You've gotten faster, the villain says unfazed. There wasn't much a blade could do him after all. What are you doing here? Always to the point. Sensei has requested your presence. Kurogyri barely mumbles but Midoriya catches it. It was crucial to keep their voices down. Neither wanted to wake his mom up, or be overhead, even if it was almost the dead of night. Plus, Kurogyri shouldn't even be here. If either of them were caught like this, their plans would be all for nothing. That's odd, did he say why? Midoriya picks the strewn blankets up and throws them onto his bed, heading for the closet. Kurogyri takes a moment to speak up, watching him pull on a green sweatshirt and jeans. No. Midoriya knew he was lying, wiggling his nose and raising a brow. Kurogyri pauses, huffing a little before giving in to his stare. Though I do believe it has to do with something about earlier today. He hints. The tone wasn't outright accusatory, but it still makes Midoriya flinch out of slight guilt. He pulls on some white sneakers, forgoing his favorite red ones. Doubting me, are we? He ties his laces quickly, standing and licking his lips. Is there reason to? Kurogyri rebukes. He was obviously trying to egg him on, but Midoriya knew better. Sensei's orders were final. No, it was firm and the truth. He was doing as he had been told. Nothing more, nothing less. Midoriya could understand why they thought he might have betrayed them and didn't fault them for it. His actions did look pretty bad on the outside. Some of it was. But he wasn't going to let that part be known. Kurogyri lets it drop at that. In one fell swoop, the villain warps them back to headquarters, the purple clearing to the familiar bar. Shigaraki was in Midoriya's face before he could even step out, the villain grabbing his arm and dragging him to the monitor. He lets him, stoic and expressionless. Explain. Shigaraki snarls, shoving him against the wall. I thought you said Sensei called for me, Kuro-sen. Midoriya looks past Shigaraki's shoulder to the black mist, monotone in his voice. There was nothing for him to be scared of. He could handle himself. Sorry, I knew you wouldn't come otherwise. Biasirdi. What is the meaning of this, Shigaraki, Kurogyri? Sensei's voice booms through the static of the TV, the tension in the air thickening. Midoriya remains still, watching the man-child with calculating eyes. Midoriya-kun seems to still have a bit of heroics left in him. Shigaraki spats. I don't understand, Tamura-san. Isn't this what you wanted? Midoriya blinks, nonchalant to the interrogation. Did you not want me to get All Might's attention? You ran in there to save Kaken. He nearly screeches, fuming. Why? It was all a ruse, Shigaraki. Sensei answers for him, the anger clear behind his tone. The drop in temperature chilled Midoriya to his core, his lips exhaling white breath from the suffocating intimidation radiating through the room. Shigaraki had set off Sensei, and he couldn't comprehend why. They had every right to suspect him, and they both knew that. You have the audacity to doubt your comrade, not when all he has ever been was loyal to us. That has always been your biggest flaw, too distrusting of everyone around you but me. It's a wonder why you even listened to Kurogiri. Tell me then, what makes you think it was part of Midoriya-kun's emissary plan? Why are you defending him? Am I not good enough to know your schemes? Shigaraki spins to the monitor, clamping his hands around it desperately. No, Shigaraki, you are not. As brilliant as you are, you still give in easily to your whims. As much as I trust you, Midoriya-kun handled the mission I set forth with precision, something you should learn. Shigaraki backs off, slumping his shoulders in defeat at the criticism. Sensei? Midoriya's eyebrows furrows in confusion. You've succeeded. Not a question but stated as fact. I believe it would be all right now to reveal the task I had trusted you with. Midoriya didn't question it further, believing that Sensei was just all-seeing. One concern, though, as loath as he was to ask, what of Mr. Sludge? A deal's a deal. Of course. Shigaraki's and Kurogiri's stare fixated on Midoriya as he waltzed over to chair and sat, crossing his legs and arms, seemingly bored when he recounted the tale of his secret mission. Sure, he had blanked there at the end, momentarily forgetting the real reason he was supposed to run in there. He hadn't expected Bakugou to have been the hostage, and the blonde had caught him off guard, making that face. In fact, the whole plan had been one giant F of a mess. The slime villain was supposed to have ran away for another day, but no, instead he decided to continue rampaging. If Midoriya hadn't shown up, he wouldn't have been able to salvage the wreckage, setting the mission back a month or so. The reality of it all, he had just been FING lucky. Not that he was going to admit that. And with the confusion, with all might, he was able to sort through his emotions. Even though Midoriya had badly wanted to become a hero before, he couldn't willingly succumb to it, not with the way things were now. That had been his conclusion. The two villains glanced at one another, Shigaraki frowning and Kurogiri deathly quiet at the finish of his story. Midoriya leans back, allowing his head to loll over the back top of the chair to stare at the ceiling. God, he was so tired now. All under your orders? Shigaraki speaks out first. Under my orders, to do whatever it takes? Sensei confirms. Can I go home and sleep now? Midoriya butts in, irritation suddenly getting the better of him. I've got school tomorrow, and I have training with all might afterwards. He doesn't move from his position, yawning loudly to prove his point. Please forgive us for disturbing your rest, Midoriya-kun. You know how Shigaraki sometimes get? Sensei apologizes, the aforementioned villain grunting in displeasure. Otherwise you've exceeded my expectations, job well done. That irritation instantly melts away, and Midoriya sighs, ruffling a hand through his hair in embarrassment at the praise. He didn't deserve it, precision his butt. It's fine, that's what friends do, right? Forgive. The tense shock of Shigaraki's face was the last thing he saw. Landing in the darkness of his room, Midoriya immediately plopped off his shoes. He sat on the bed staring at his hands, adjusting to what he let slip out. Friends? The next day was chaos. The instant Midoriya slid the door open to the classroom, his peers erupted into an uproar. Swiftly he shut it, scowling at the door and the noise behind it. It had been like this all morning. Students shouting both encouragement and jeers in the hallways. Some jealous of his meeting with All Might, and others curious as to why the number one hero decided to hijack Midoriya. They wouldn't leave him the F alone. It was the Tiro incident all over. Good morning, Midoriya-kun. He sighed, sidestepping and facing Akio, who smiled brightly at him. Great. This guy. Ryuga-kun. It was weird saying his name on a short basis, but it was too long for him to care to pronounce. They stared at each other, and Midoriya had a sense of déjà vu. Not going to class? Akio finally inquires, blinking curiously. Midoriya glanced to the door, the racket in the room still ongoing. He shook his head, adjusting his pack. I was going to, but not anymore. He should have had the foresight to just skip today. Let's skip together then. Akio pumps a fist up into the air, grinning mischievously at the prospect of ditching school. WW. Midoriya stutters, surprised. That came out of left field. Were you planning to? He recovers, entirely confused by his peer. He was trying to get a read on him but failing miserably. Oh. You looked uncomfortable though, with all the attention. He hums, his smile unfaltering. And having someone to hang out with is a lot better than being lonely. That had felt like a slap to the face. Lonely? Is that how Akio saw him? Yeah, you look sad sometimes. I mean, I only transferred here a year ago, and you've never really noticed me, but I don't know. At first glance you seemed fine, then the more I watched, the more I saw it. Akio frowns, the look on him unfitting for someone as cheery as him. Sorry. That sounded weird. I've actually wanted to talk to you ever since I saw you in that video. You were really cool, and I wasn't brave enough to approach you until the other day. You know I'm quirkless, right? Midoriya blurts out. He didn't know what to do. Knowing someone admired him was a bit much, a feat he thought he would never achieve, and yet here it was, in the form of bright-eyed and cheery Akio. And? That didn't stop you from running in to save Bakugou-kun. That's what makes you so awesome, you don't let anything hold you back. I wish I was like that. Akio sheepishly laughs, rubbing his neck. What are you two doing? Midoriya jumps, whipping around to their teacher, her foot tapping impatiently and glaring down at them both. Class is about to start. A tug at his arm and suddenly he's running, getting pulled along by Akio who laughs. Whoops. Let's go. Detention for you both if you don't get back here this instant. She shrills, but the threat remains unimpressive. Oh, I'm shaking in my boots. Midoriya yells back, laughing as they skid around the corner of the hallway. They didn't stop running until they were well out of the school, sprinting down the sidewalk of the street and giggling. Akio is the first to slow down, arms spread out and head up as if he just won a track race. Midoriya rolls his eyes, brushing past the other and relishing in the fading thrill of pissing off their homeroom teacher. You're weird, Midoriya says to him. I know. He grins, catching up. They hung out right up till Midoriya's meet-up time with All Might. They had decided to go to the arcade, then to a small cafe to eat, and though they didn't do much besides play games and talk, Midoriya would be lying if he said he didn't have a great time. In the end they exchanged numbers, and it wasn't until Akio was out of sight that he felt the buzz of his phone. Sliding the screen open, he read the text, a small smile on his face. Ryuga-kun, let's be friends, laughing face. Midoriya sent a quick text back, swiping it close and shoving it back into his pocket. There was a nagging feeling that he shouldn't, but it had been nice, and the first time in his life that he had fun like that. A part of him didn't want to ruin that chance for a bit of normalcy. It was time to focus. His destination was an empty warehouse in an abandoned industrial district. The area had been closed off and set for demolition, to be turned into some mall or whatever, but would do for now. It also gave him the chance to broaden the range for his other quirk, and he made it his goal to swipe his fingers against the walls of each building he passed, even stopping to touch the ground here and there. The last one, Midoriya pushed through the large metal doors, just enough to allow him to slip through. It was pretty dark inside, and he paused, letting his eyes adjust. Swish. Midoriya reflexively blocked. One for all, reinforcing his arms to take the brunt of the force, his sleeves shredding lightly in a whirl of power. Pain shot through them, and he gritted his teeth, stumbling back and calling the ability off before the damage could be done. Oh, not bad, my boy. All Might booms, letting his fist fall. Do you always sneakily attack your students like that? Midoriya shakes his arms, trying to ebb the pain away from the use of his quirk. All Might deflates in a wish of steam, grinning. You went over, didn't you? Yeah, and it hurts. Midoriya holds them out, testing his fingers and probing at his arms. He didn't feel anything wrong with them, the pain turning into aches. And what if that hadn't been me? He scowls, staring down at the remaining pieces of his sleeves. I saw you coming, so it's okay. All Might gives him a thumbs up. Since you can call forth one for all like that, we can skip the basics. He waves Midoriya in further, pulling down on the large lever near the entrance. The underused lights slowly flickered on, chasing away the shadows to reveal the makeshift gym. A boxing ring sat in the middle, with a weight set and some mats off to the side. But the different colored punching bags swaying from chains across the large warehouse caught his interest the most. 6 months, that's all the time we have before the entrance exams to UA. All Might walks him to the center, stepping in and between the cords of the ring. You obviously have some experience when it comes to hand-combat, which we should still improve on. Midoriya drops his bag to the ground and crawls through, standing to face All Might on the elevated platform. My question is, how much you know? Do you have any particular style? It's mixed. Midoriya answers, pulling off his blazer. He knew where this was heading. All Might furrows his brows. Mixed martial arts? Seriously? He says with disbelief. Yep. Midoriya pops. Who taught you? Midoriya only grins, hands on his hips, earning him a grumble from the #1 hero. He wasn't about to release that kind of information. I may not be qualified for this. It's not an outdated style per se, but it's rare even among pro heroes. All Might rubs his chin, thinking. Of course it is. Heroes revolve their style around their quirks, relying more on it than not. There is a few who had to add martial arts to their arsenal. Otherwise, y'all are a bunch of buffoons throwing punches and kicks. Midoriya slaps a hand over his mouth, eyes wide. He just insulted All Might. However, I'm going to have to rectify that statement. It's true, some rely too much on their quirks, but I did learn how to punch correctly as most did. That I can teach you while incorporating one for all. Only punches, got it? Midoriya teases with a smirk. All Might sighs, trying to keep his lips from twitching into a grin. Cheeky, aren't you? Not the quivering cry baby I thought you were. Sorry, once I get going I can't stop. It's quite all right. I should have expected that much. All Might gives in and smiles, finding it a bit refreshing. Usually company involved worrying about his health, or who the next successor would be. Never the carefree banter. Anyways, for now I can spare 30 minutes a day. All Might's form bulks and he drops into a stance. Come at me. Midoriya kicks off his red shoes. Sure. He pulses the quirk through his legs, testing. Midoriya has yet to try that, and this was a good time for it. Hopping in place, All Might remains still, watching and waiting for him to make the first move. Deeming it safe enough, Midoriya revs it and closes the distance in a flash, appearing straight in front of All Might. He spreads the energy, directing it into his arms for the uppercut. The hero's head tilts back, bending and flipping backwards, kicking out his heel at the last second. It catches Midoriya in the chin, who grunts in pain and falls back, rolling with the momentum to the ground and into a crouch. Midoriya wipes at his mouth, tasting blood. How's that for a bouffon? All Might says, hands on his hips in a proud pose. The taunt does its job, and Midoriya is flying towards him, spinning out a kick and bursting with one for all. He knew it would be blocked and prepared for it, grappling his legs around All Might's arm when the hero grabs his ankle, trying to throw him the other way. Midoriya bends back at the peak of the movement, palms hitting the platform and power in his legs. He pulls, jerking All Might overhead in his flip, his mass hitting the ground behind him with a giant thud. What sort of move was that? All Might exclaims, surprised at the sudden throw. Improvising. Midoriya spins on a heel, the hero already back on his feet. They continued like this for the time All Might had promised, throwing punches, kicks, and blocks in a flurried dance. They took small breaks in between spars. Going for 30 minutes straight would be too taxing. In fact, most battles wouldn't last that long. In that time, Midoriya was able to land a few good hits, but not as many as All Might. The hero was pulling his punches, that he knew, but catching him off guard time from time was satisfying nonetheless. Okay, time's up. All Might blocks the last kick, Midoriya landing into a stop and breathing heavily, liking the sweat from his upper lip. His body ached, no doubt littered with bruises. You're going to give those pro heroes a run for their money. All Might deflates, coughing. I'm a lot more curious of who your instructor is now. They're long gone, so it doesn't matter. Midoriya shrugs, hopping off the platform. He tried not to act too bothered about it. But the grip on his water bottle said otherwise, the liquid splashing upwards into his face. Midoriya curses quietly, wiping himself off with a towel and heading straight for the weights. The pro hero follows, leaving it at that, for now. Easy to fool. After the long evening of training, Midoriya carried his tired butt home. Before he left, All Might had set up a schedule to maximize his training, while allowing the need for rest. The goal was to get him up 35% with one for all before the exams. Midoriya wanted to be at 50. Izuku. Yep, I'm home, he shouts, shutting the door behind him. How was study? Oh goodness, what happened? Inko gasps as she comes around the corner, rushing to his side in a panicked state of worry. She grabs at his chin, tilting his head to get a better look, and Midoriya pulls away, hissing at the slight jab of pain. It's nothing, I just tripped and fell. He gently pushes her hand away with the back of his own. Is it really that noticeable? Of course. It's all back and blue. Are you sure you didn't break your jaw? Inko does as he wishes and lets go, running back into the kitchen. I don't think so. It didn't hurt that bad after the initial fall, so dash. We all know you have a high tolerance for pain, Izuku. You could never tell when you've broken anything. I remember when you came home with a broken arm, none the wiser. She shouts from the kitchen. Huh, I don't remember that. Midoriya slips off his shoes, following to find her at the fridge, the freezer propped open and a bag in her hand, the other scooping ice. You also said you fell? Nope, don't remember. He plopped himself on one of the counter stools, spinning it around once. Don't get sassy with me, mister. Inko scolds, shutting the freezer. She sighs at his antics, holding out the cold bag to him. Sheepishly, Midoriya gets up and takes it, placing it under his chin obediently to pacify his mother. You need to take more care of yourself. Mom, I am. There isn't exactly a cure for the clumsy, but I try. Midoriya sits back down, the soul-searching stare from his mother starting to get to him. You would tell me if you're getting bullied again? She reopens the fridge and rummages for some leftovers, pulling out a container. The idea of food makes Midoriya's stomach growl. Yeah, he pauses, tapping at the counter, but I did make a friend today. Inko w's her head around at him with wide eyes, tears sparkling at the edges. Oh, Izuku. That's so great, honey. She cries, setting the cold food down to Midoriya's disdain. He's really hungry. Inko dashes around the counter to pull him into a hug, and Midoriya lets her, glad for the change of subject, as embarrassing as she was making it. He could feel the rush of warmth building up in his cheeks, the telltale signs of a blush. I'm so happy for you. Inko squeezes him once more before pulling away. What's their name? Maybe we should invite them over for dinner. I would really like to meet them. She goes back to warming up the curry, spouting plans. Midoriya gave her a small smile. Rugaterio Akio, and that's a good idea, Mom. Inko beams at him. He hasn't seen his mother smile like that in a long time. Why didn't you tell me this part of the plan earlier, Tamura-san? Why didn't you tell me yours? Touché. Midoriya flips open the file that was plopped down in front of him, humming at the picture of a hero he's never seen or heard before. That was rare. Midoriya prided himself of being up to date with both current and past heroes, and this one literally had been under his nose. You would think he would have figured it out long ago. You want me to impersonate him? Now that you have All Might's quirk, I made a few adjustments. Shigaraki scratches at his neck absentmindedly. In fact, this works in our favor. The quirk sensei gifted you will be most effective for this mission too. Kurojairi can only do so much on his own when it comes to infiltration. Midoriya hums, contemplating as he reads over Nakamura Tataro's history. I'm pretty limited though, he begins to argue. I can't just pop in wherever I please. I mean, I could, since Mr. Sludge is there, but it would be redundant to get stuck in a quirk-holding cell. Not unless it doesn't take him long to piece the plan together, and he frowns up at Shigaraki. So, I sneak into the control room, shut down security, take out a few guards, and then jailbreak Mr. Sludge. Hardly seems fair making me do all the work. He scoffs. What sort of code name was that? You're the one who made the contract. The rest of us are only doing it because Sensei ordered it. The vice in Shigarak's voice told him all he needed to know. The villain still wasn't pleased with his deception, and he figured this was his way of getting revenge. Midoriya tilts his chair back, rocking with the heel of his foot. Also, those rocks might get placed at random. Kurojairi needs to be swift, and we can't guarantee they'll hit the marks, Shigaraki points out. Awesome. Why not just F'd him up the butt with a cactus at this point and call it good? That is a F ton of security I already have to get through myself. He sighs, flinching at the imagery he had given himself. Worse now that I don't know where exactly I might end up. We'll be supporting you from the outside, but as soon as you shut down the system, we'll run in and provide cover. Midoriya did have to admit though, it was a solid plan. When Sensei had compared him to Shigaraki, their relationship got awkward, seeing as the villain was the senpai in the apprenticeship. He could tell that Shigaraki was trying to make up for it, and even then, Midoriya didn't entirely think of himself as better than him. They were the same overall. One a little more childish than the other, but 2 peas in a pod. How many? A dozen plus the flyer. On second thought, maybe Midoriya spoke too soon. Is it even ready? It will be now. That's too many villains. If more get caught, it would be a waste of resources. Should have thought of that sooner, Midoriya-kun. Shigaraki smugly smiles. The chair clunked back down with a heavy thud, and he chuckles. Oh, he thought, don't forget he knows I'm working with you guys now. If he decided to spill the beans, he could. Shigaraki pitches a whine, tapping his fingers impatiently against the table loudly. Screw you. Sorry, you're not my type. He stretches back, the loud pops of his spine on the chair satisfying. From the side, Midoriya notices the purple mist of Kurogyari and gives him a lazy wave, welcoming the other villain. How long you been there? He questions. Kurogyari steps around the table and drops a pile of pebbles heavily onto its surface. 16 small ones, he counted, each with the capability of screwing him over in this twisted game of roulette. Is that something a 15-year-old should be saying? He asks, and Midoriya smirks, beginning the task of picking through the rocks. He started it, besides, it's hardly inappropriate. His smile turns into flashing teeth and narrowing eyes. Not unless you have a problem with that. The grin suddenly becomes threatening. The cold of his voice unknowingly sent chills down the other's spine, but Kurogyari held his demeanor, shrugging. A pat lands on top his fluffy hair and Midoriya smacks the misty hand away. You can be really scary when you want a kid, he comments, moving back behind the counter to fiddle with something. Anyways, Midoriya ignores him. If we're taking a dozen, I'm choosing. He didn't want a bunch of willy-nilly villains having his back. He was going to make a team, one that contemplated each other's quirks, strengths, and weaknesses. Shigaraki eyes him momentarily before clicking his tongue in annoyance. Fine. Judging how he didn't argue, he probably thought it was best too. Midoriya-kun. Sensei crackles through the monitor and he perks up. Shigaraki made an excellent argument earlier, regarding Nakamura-san. If Sensei was going off the tangent, it must be important. Oh. Midoriya chimes, glancing to the white-haired man. This will be his debut as a villain, and hopefully any suspicion to come later will directly overlook you. Stacking on the roles, aren't we? Midoriya jokingly huffs. It could work. He's the same size, same build. The only thing he would have to worry about was his hair. Easy peasy. So it's not just a rescue mission anymore. He mumbles, rereading over the quirk and the counter that he's even yet to find. Where they found this file he didn't know. It didn't look like something Shigaraki would put together, since this was before Midoriya even joined up. And as far as he's concerned, listing weaknesses like that wasn't something that was required when registering. No one did it. For reasons like this. Now come, I've prepared a gift for you. It is almost time, Sensei says, breaking through his thoughts. Midoriya stands and Shigaraki beckons him to the back room. Upon entering, he was immediately drawn to a black one-piece, skin-tight? He couldn't tell, though probably just about, suit hanging by Sensei's bed, and Midoriya grins, clapping his hands once in delight. You shouldn't have. It was a replica of the pro hero's outfit. There wasn't much to it besides the half-gray rectangles that horizontally stripped down and along the sides. Around the arms, the shape completed into a circle thrice, including one on each thigh for an alternating pattern. The sleeves cut off above the fingers and looks to cover half the feet. He didn't see any shoes, which made sense considering his quirk. The only difference to the costume was the black visor that hung with it. What Midoriya thought to have been a decorative eyeball on the headpiece blinks, its slit pupil blowing wide as it spots him. What's that? He steps over to pull the visor off, angling the black mask every which way to get a better look. The yellow eye follows his every movement. Sensei smiles with stained teeth, tilting his head directly at him. Now to do something about that green hair. So, who is it? It's been 2 months since Yagi Toshinori has taken young Midoriya under his wing, 2 months without revealing his successor to Nizo, nor anyone. The principal hadn't pushed at first, allowing him to settle with the fast pace of change. The #1 hero didn't think he would have found someone the instant he arrived in Japan. In fact, there had been a contender lined up, and suddenly finding himself a mentor without that consideration had been jarring. But now that the dust has more or so settled, he was here, having tea with the configured human animal. Toshinori took his time to answer, sipping at his cup and exhaling in content. Midoriya Izuku. I'm sure you've heard of him. Nizo looks surprised, leaning forward. Interesting, he's quite infamous by this point. Infamous was an understatement. Not that it was a bad thing, but Toshinori had found that the other heroes weren't too keen about the kid. Izuku was more or so famous on the civilian side, infamous in the field of heroes. He grunts in agreement, setting the drink down on the tabletop. I didn't recognize him at first, it was quite a shock though when I found out. You never change, Yagi-sen. The animal gently smiles at him. You've picked quite a person, in my opinion. I believe so too. Then what is the matter? Nizo presses. He goes silent again, staring at his cup of tea. Finally he spits it out. Young Midoriya is an enigma. Nizo lightly swirls his spoon, the clank of the metal soft, having just plopped sugar cubes into his drink. That probably was his 9th one, making him wonder if the principal could even taste the tea at all. Care to further explain? Nizo hums and takes a long sip, liking the bitter-sweet liquid from his lips. Watching him made Toshinori feel slightly nauseated. He doesn't speak at all about his life at home, nor school. He shows up, trains, and then leaves. He says and leans back, forgetting the sugary tea and rubbing at his chin. This was the reason why he went seeking the principal, looking for advice, and now that he was here, well, he wasn't sure if it was just him being worried over nothing. Perhaps he's just shy? Nizo offers, shrugging. That is what I thought too, but Toshinori heaves a sigh, ruffling fingers through his hair. Any time I try to bring anything up, he dodges the question. Slippery that one. His lips twitch. He's got quite the knack for leading you around by the nose, and before you know it, he's gotten away. He pauses a moment and Nizo is quiet. The silence stretches, and he sighs again, exasperated. It's strange really, the boy is pretty timid overall, but when you get him in the ring, he's got all the confidence in the world, rightly so. Which brings me to the next topic. Toshinori gently picks up his tea, cradling it in his hand for the comforting warmth. There was someone before me, who's trained him. Someone who believed in him when he had been quirkless. He feels the guilt settle in his stomach and he frowns. Of course I didn't know him, but I was quick to judge and I can't help but feel he relents me. That may be the reason he's trying to keep his distance. He hasn't fully forgiven me, despite my apologies. We all make mistakes, Yagi-san. I can't afford to. You may be the #1 hero, but you are still human, Toshinori. Then what should I do? Talk to him. I've already Toshinori starts to frustrate, but quiets at Nizo's paw, signaling that the principal hadn't finished. What I meant was you need to talk to him, let him know a little more about yourself first. Likes, dislikes, anything. He advises. You said he's a fan of yours, right? Midoriya-kun might have put you on a pedestal. Which in that case, show him you not all might. Not all might? Try that, and see what happens. Nizo finishes, downing the last of his tea. But that was his whole life, being all might. He wasn't sure it would work. Izuku was a tricky kid to deal with and he was tempted to bring him along next time just to prove his point, but that may bring blames of favoritism when it came time for the exams. Thank you for your time, Nizo-san. Toshinori says and stands, bowing. Nonetheless, he would try. Coming from the principal, his words held weight, and it would be foolish not to at least. Let me know how it goes. The principal dismisses him and Toshinori leaves, shutting the door behind him quietly. The sudden buzz of his cell alerts him to a text, and he pulls it from his overly large pockets, blinking in surprise. A set of coordinates. Toshinori hurries down the hallways of UA, dialing the number that rarely graces him with his presence. Aizawa-sen, what's going on? Blinks here. Ha! That was a name he hasn't heard in ages. Didn't he disappear? Toshinori asks. He was now dashing through the entrance. Further down the street, he ducks into an alley, bulking into form and leaping high into the sky. I don't have much time to explain, you need to get to Acre Prison now. Aizawa sounded out of breath. He was running or had been fighting, and Toshinori didn't like either options. Though Acre Prison, wasn't that where the sludge villain had been put? Boom. The large explosion in the background and Aizawa's cursing speeds him up, feet touching ground for a moment before he springs higher, faster. I'm on my way, Eraserhead. Hurry. The call ends, and he quickly tucks the device away, reaching the outskirts of the city, the forest ahead stretching on for miles and rolling beyond the mountains. Acre Prison, an underground fortress underneath the trees that held the lower-level criminals. He wondered what Aizawa had been doing there in the first place. He was more of a night-type kind of guy, averse to attracting too much attention, and the pro-hero out in the daylight like this was almost unheard of. Blink. That name. It makes All Might's stomach churn. All Might spotted the one-level building, the entrance to the prison. Or what was left of it. The building had been reduced to rubble, smoke rising from the large elevator that had been blown wide open. There was one way in and one way out, which was the elevator that descended to the lower levels. He's been here only once before, and knew that Acre Prison was a vast maze below the surface, 6 layers deep, and was designed to keep escapees contained if they were ever to break out of their holding blocks. For a low-level prison, they didn't take the criminals lightly, and you couldn't when the world was filled with Quirk users. All Might landed, skidding to a heavy halt. The question now was, where was everybody else? He would have anticipated the guards fighting off their attackers. It had been lively when he called Aizawa, but now it was deathly quiet. Disturbingly so. All Might kept his guard up, cautious as he climbed over the rubble, searching for any signs of life. The battle must have been taken under, which would be difficult. For him to fight in closed quarters. Difficult but not impossible. He was a pro-hero after all. Well, look at what the stray cat dragged in. All Might tensed, directing his attention to the darkened. He could barely make out the figure, hiding in the shadows of the humongous torn doors. They must be standing guard, which meant the elevator still worked and their objective still yet to be achieved. Why else would they stay behind? He narrowed his eyes, straining to get a better visual. The killing intent was thick in the air. Where's Eraserhead? All Might booms. For now, he was more worried for his friend. It wasn't like him to call back up, which meant the situation had turned deathly out of control. Instead of answering his question like villains never do, they cackle, a pale hand grabbing along the torn metal edges and pointing a finger. No, what? All Might doesn't have time to react to the large black blur that came hurtling from the darkness, slamming into him. He goes flying, crashing, and breaking through the trees that do little to stop his momentum. All Might, amidst the flurry of wings and claws, finds purchase against the ground and digs his heels, grabbing hold of the creature to a halt. He pulls, lifting the Nomu off its feet and sends it flying the other way into another tree, snapping the spruce in half from the force as the mass of body and wings topples. All Might straightens, ragged and covered in shallow cuts. Never has he seen a Quirk user like that, one who could even rival his speed. They were strong, and he feared he wouldn't reach Aizawa in time if their fight dragged out. Nonetheless, if he ran past them they would follow, putting whoever else was down there in danger. No, it would be better to fight out in the open. Aizawa was going to have to hold out a little longer. Ahaha, Nomu is pretty strong, isn't he? Knocking the number 1 hero off his feet. I wonder what else he can do to you. The deathly pale figure covered in grasping hands shuffled along their path of destruction, and he recognized the villain instantly. Shigaraki. The cops had been searching high and low for him, even All Might's friend was having a difficult time tracking the villain down. The name wasn't registered anywhere in the database, and it didn't help they only had partial of it, of course thanks to Izuku. After the incident, Shigaraki and his pals haven't reared their ugly heads for 2 whole years. So why now? All Might grits his teeth, the idea of his student held hostage by these terrifying villains flashing through his mind's eye. Izuku had been fine when he was found, a little banged up but alive. From the reports, he couldn't remember much though, and any intel he could give had been useless. However, who knows what they had really done to him? It was another topic that All Might needed to breach with his student. The others should be done right about now. Shigaraki grins behind the hand, spreading his arms out. You came to Eraserhead's rescue, didn't you? He laughs, scratching at his neck gleefully. I'm sorry to report, but your little friend's dead. All Might felt the blood drain from his face. That couldn't be right, he was lying. He had spoken to Aizawa only a few minutes ago. A minute is all it takes for the tide of battle to change. He refused to believe it. This wasn't part of the plan, but Shigaraki scratches at his skin harder, blood welling underneath his fingernails when he broke skin. I guess I really can't stand worthless trash like you. Out of nowhere, All Might catches the glimpse of a small black and gray clothed body before turning to fend off the Nomu. Instead, the creature is knocked back by a small pebble ricocheting off its neck. All Might's eyes widens in surprise when the villain topples over for the second time. All Might w's around to see the black-clad newcomer standing by Shigaraki, grinning wildly beneath the visor that masked his identity, tossing a rock up and down his hand. Tisk, TSK, Tamura-san. They say, their voice cackling with static. All Might wasn't sure who was speaking, his vision tunneling with shock. For the first time in his life, All Might couldn't move, the disbelief freezing up his system. The disbelief, the guilt, and then anger, at himself, and All Might couldn't. No, Blink's lips moved but their words didn't sink. Long time no see, Mighty. He waves, as if he was the best friend you haven't seen for years and came back to surprise you at your birthday party. Totaro. All Might chokes out, "Huh?" He was so incoherent it was embarrassing. Aizawa, what was going on here? After all this time? Here? Obviously. The former hero shrugs, wrapping an arm around Shigaraki's shoulder like they were best buds. My job to keep this one in check, you see. He sounded incredibly smug, the pale villain pushing the other off him in disdain. Shut up. Shigaraki spits. But what are you doing? All Might roars, his voice cracking with pain. This was too much, Blink couldn't be in league with them. Not kind-hearted, caring, innocent and cheery Totaro. None of it made sense. When the hero had disappeared along with many others, it nearly tore All Might apart. He couldn't even protect his friend. He desperately searched for months on end, unwilling to give up. Once the year passed with no leads, the cops finally presumed him dead, even though Totaro's body was the only one that hadn't been found. The only thing All Might could do was to move on and focus on his hero work. Not that it ever helped to wash away the guilt and helplessness. He had given up on Totaro. And now he was here and alive. That's a good look on you, Mighty. Blink giggles. How you doing? Missed me? Just ran into Eraserhead a little bit ago, and he seems to be doing well, before I gave him a nasty present. I got one in return though, see, wasn't he nice? He rambles, and it's all Might can do to keep up, Blink holding up his arm to reveal the large gash dripping with blood. All Might hadn't even noticed the red liquid puddling at Blink's bare feet. Got me with my own knife he did, sneaky that one. You haven't answered my question. All Might grits out. Blink ignores him, tilting his head to Shigaraki. Mission success, they've already left so we should get going ourselves. He holds his arm close, shuffling forward towards All Might who waits with bated breath. Was he planning to attack? He tenses, ready, but Blink brushes against his shoulder, tiptoeing to reach his height and patting in comfort. That's obvious too. I'll let you live this time in memory of our friendship. The next time we cross paths, you better consider me your enemy or you'll forfeit your life, symbol of peace. The yellow eye moves, blinking up at All Might in an almost nonchalant manner. He couldn't let him leave like this, not until Blink explained to him what the hell happened. It wasn't unheard of for heroes to fall. It was a rare occurrence though, one that happened once in a blue moon, but All Might didn't ever think it could happen to someone like Totaro. He needed to know what set him off. He reaches out to grab Blink's arm with the question on his tongue, but he slips through his fingers, leaving a bloodied handprint on his white shirt. He's always ruining my fun, but looks like he's made up his mind. Shigaraki whistles and snaps All Might out of his stupor, the Nomo flying above his head to his He couldn't bring himself to try and stop the villain from boarding the creature's back. I'll definitely beat the boss next time. All Might dashes to the elevator the moment Nomu takes off. Every fiber of his being was screaming at him not to let them go, but he couldn't waste time, the inner turmoil gnawing at his insides. You would think backup would have already arrived, and All Might speculated they must have cut off the security alarms. If they had jammed the signals, Aizawa's text wouldn't have reached him, and he wouldn't have been able to call in return. Was it a mistake on the villain's part, or deliberate? All Might stores the thought for later, peering down into the darkness of the. If what Blink had said was true, why was the lift still at the bottom? A large thud and clink of mechanics nearly startles All Might and he steps back. That answers his question. Someone must have called the elevator down, and was now ascending. He drops into a stance, ready to blow them to kingdom come. Takes a good while for the lift to surface, and when it does, All Might breathes out a sigh of relief, rushing to the aid of the injured form leaning against the lever. Aizawa, soaked in blood and looking like a supernatural entity of a horror film, his eyes glowing and hair floating. When he recognizes All Might, he drops his quirk, stumbling forward. "You're late," he says, grunting in pain. "My apologies. I was held up." All Might drifts off, eyeing the injured pro-hero warily. "They got away." "Why, He gently grabs Aizawa's arm to support him. "And the guards?" "Dead." He tightly responds, and All Might doesn't push further. "The prisoners are wreaking havoc down there, it won't be long before they find their way out." Aizawa sways, the grip All Might has on him keeping him on his feet. "We should get you to a hospital." Judging from how drenched Aizawa's clothing was, he's lost a lot of blood. Any more and All Might was sure he wouldn't make it. No wonder Shigaraki thought him good as dead, if someone told him his status. Aizawa weakly grunts in agreement, and doesn't complain when he's picked up, hissing slightly from the jarring movements. "Brace yourself." All Might mutters and crouches, building up the power in his legs. He could feel the hero tense in his arms, though relaxes once they are high in the air. Down below, All Might could hear the distant alarm of sirens, the flashing lights of police cars and armored trucks speeding along the long road to the prison. "Did you call them?" All Might asks over the wind, puzzled. Why were they only arriving now? And if the system truly had been shut off, they wouldn't have known it all in the first place. The prison being so far out as it was made it truly isolated. Proven today to be a double-edged sword. "Oh. They jammed the signal soon after you had called." He barely heard the weak answer and All Might frowns, scanning the city for the closest hospital in their quick arrival to the outskirts. "I fed up." Midoriya groans, his injured arm splayed out for Kurogiri who was working on cleaning the gash. The knife wound started at his shoulder and along the outside of his arm, twisting inside to stop halfway down his forearm. Eraserhead got him good. And they couldn't take him to the hospital to see how much damage was done. Midoriya could only hope for the best. He leant back against the chair and threw his good arm over his eyes, kicking his feet up on the table to try and relax, the dizziness finally getting to him. The movement jostled his ribs and Midoriya flinched from the pain that shot through his chest. He probably broke a few of them, and don't get him started on the nasty bruises he could feel forming. The pro-hero did quite a number on his body. He wondered how he was going to hide his injuries from All Might. "Easy, you didn't know he was going to be in there," Kuro says, and Midoriya snorts, peeking out a green eye at him. "It was the fifth to last pebble. I hadn't even taken out all the guards yet, and I panicked." He bit his lip, clenching his hand into a fist. At least he could still feel that, which meant there wasn't any major nerve damage. "Maybe. I was stupid. I thought I could get him before he realized I was there. I should have just jumped to a different one and left him alone. But no, I had to freak out and stab him with my FNG knife." He did catch him off guard, but after that, it turned into an all-out fight. One that he wasn't severely prepared for. To top it off, I used one for all to get away. His quirk was a real pain in the butt. If Midoriya hadn't used the rock for the quirk, he was sure Eraserhead would have thought it eerily similar to All Might's and probably put two and two together. Though now as Blink, they will know he has two quirks, throwing that surprise out the window right off the bat. They will try to figure out what it is. Well, you did have the foresight to bring that jammer quirk user. But he called All Might before I could contact Tomura-san. Ugh, what a mess. I guess at least I got to play up the part. Midoriya heaves a sigh and mulls over the mistakes he made today. It was like last time and the plan to obtain All Might's power. Great on paper but difficult to actually carry out. Nothing ever seems to go as planned. Midoriya bursts into a bout of giggles. Of course, they were doing this all wrong. He did think of bringing along that jammer villain, but he didn't create any other failsafes. Truthfully, they went in pretty half-butted despite it being a good idea. They should have fleshed out the mission more, create backup plans for the most likely scenarios where things could go wrong. He also needed to better prepare himself when faced with those variables. Not to mention, real combat was entirely different than training and Midoriya got a real good taste of it. Never let your guard down, even when you think you've fully incapacitated your opponent. That was one lesson he was going to drill into his head from now on. He needed to be on the same level of the pros if any of this was going to work. Done. Kuro breaks through his concentration and stands, leaving Midoriya to examine his stitched arm. It burned like hell. You're going to need a sling, he says, retrieving a piece of white fabric from behind the counter. Sheet for how long? Ideally, a month or two. Midoriya lets slip a string of colorful words and drops his feet to sit properly, slamming his good fist against the table. Kurogiri starts the process of wrapping his arm, and he ignores the new amount of pain flashing through his shoulder. And not ideally? He asks, grinding his teeth. The villain hesitates. 3 weeks at the very least. 2 weeks it is. Midoriya couldn't spare any more time than that. It was bad enough that he had to somehow make up an excuse to skip out on training with All Might for 2 whole FING weeks. It was probably the max he could get away with, even if that. Don't use it all then or you'll render your arm useless? Kurogiri compromised instead of arguing. Midoriya can be just as stubborn as Shigaraki. Fine. He agrees and glances to the door to the basement. Midoriya wondered how the sludge was doing. Suddenly it's pulled wide open and Shigaraki angrily stomps through, a high-pitched shrill bouncing off the walls before it's cut off by the heavy door slamming shut. What the F dash? Midoriya sprang to his feet, but Shigaraki waves him down, the rage of anger still decorating his face in contradiction to the motion. He remains standing however, watching as Shigaraki fumes silently, the room temperature dropping to a dreadful. We've been compromised, he finally says. Well, wasn't that FNG fantastic? All Might watched his friend hurried off by the staff and nurses. They were quick, professional. It still didn't alleviate his worry. Then blink, he felt sick. The nurses, doctors, and staff were now bustling around him, shouting orders and preparing for the mass patients they would soon be receiving. They didn't have time to gawk at the number 1 hero, not after the warning he gave them. It prompted them to get the ambulances going out to site. In case there were survivors, he could only hope. Hope that Aizawa was wrong. His fists clenched and he sighs, deciding it was better to head to the waiting room instead of forcing people to move around him. He's just in the way at this point. All Might turns on his heels and finds the large room down the hall. There are a few people here, of course. There always is. A woman and her child. A man on his own, leg bouncing and hunched over. A couple sitting together and whispering quietly and nervously. Thankfully, they all were engrossed in their own issues to notice the man. So, he found a quiet corner, out of sight as much as he could be, and pulls out his phone. The pause. Who should he call? Yamada. He would want to know right away. Tsukachi. Principal Nizu. His fingers moved deftly along the smaller phone, preparing himself. Mike was surprised that All Might was calling him. It was such a rare occurrence that he could hear the curiosity and even excitement in the other man's voice. Yo, All Might. Finally decided to go karaokeing with us, did you? The guilt settled heavily in his stomach, his throat tightening. Aizawa is in the hospital. Silence, and then a sharp intake of air and urgency in his shaky voice. Where? He gives him the name, district, eyes focused on the floor. And that is all that Mike needed. No questions asked, not yet. He was on the way. The call ends, and he scrolls through his small contact list, pulling up the detective's name next. All Might waits, the anticipation of ringing sitting heavy on his shoulders. He is greeted enthusiastically. Tsukachi sounded busy, there was shouting in the background, some sort of preparation. He recognized it. Funny. I was just about to call you. Totaro is alive. He rips it off like a band-aid, and he's earned with silence. After a heartbeat, he explains, Acre Prison, Aizawa, the confrontation. All Might can practically hear the gears grinding, the surprise, all wrapped up into one. Finally, what's most important right now is that we have a location. Hurry. The chill in the room remained, emitting from Sensei, who was taking care of the sludge man in the other. But the rest of them didn't have much time. Shigaraki was going to have to leave most of his things, this he knew. Not that there wasn't anything more important than his console and games. He grabs a bag, quick to wrap them up in some clothing as he packs. It takes him less than a minute, and he's out the door, greeted by his member who was on his feet, speaking with Midoriya and Kuro. They are already here. His emissary speaks ominously, calmly, smiling as he addresses them all. Midoriya-kun, you know what to do. We shall apprise you of our location once things have settled. For now, go home, rest and wait. His voice echoes in the helmet, and the boy nods, before pausing. The suit? He gestures towards himself. All right. He didn't have time to change. Do not worry, Kuwa will come for it tonight. No more dilly-dallying. We don't have much time. Their MST are chuckles. He didn't sound worried, of course he didn't. But it wouldn't be good for Midoriya to get caught here. Shigaraki scratches his neck and watches the boy disappear in a blink. Is this really okay, Sensei? He asks, sauntering over to Kuro, the purple mist of his quirk activating to envelop them both. All according to plan. Do not worry, my apprentice. They were beginning to be pulled within the portal to wherever their next destination would be. Crack. Boom. The ground vibrates underneath them, and the last thing they glimpsed was the wall of the bar suddenly blasting forward, All Might standing within the destruction in a near-palpable fury. Oh ho, scary, Shigaraki manages the taunts with a laugh. His vision starts to go completely dark. Villains 2, Heroes 0. No. They were too late. Damn it. All Might's fist punches through the wall in frustration, blowing it out further. He didn't care. They got away. Only a few heroes were quick enough to get to the location on such short notice. All Might. Endeavor, Edge Shot, Ingenium. All on standby. But it was all for naught. The only lead they had up in smokes after only a few seconds. Tsukachi comes up behind him after All Might relayed his status, glancing around the empty bar and turning to shout orders. The bulky hero moves towards the back 2 doors, slamming them open just to be sure. No threats. He rubs his face for a moment at the machinery that had been left behind. We'll get them. The determination of his friend voiced behind him, pulling him out of his thoughts. I hope so. All Might turns to leave, leaving the police department to do their job. In one powerful leap, he bursts up into the air and in the direction of the hospital. A fiery orange of flames catches his attention from below, the number 2 hero looking up to watch him leave. It looked like Endeavor wanted to talk to him. But he was gone too quick, and he didn't care much for the man right now. He couldn't leave Yamada hanging, even if he knew it was the nature of the job for things to happen quickly. He would understand. Though he wished he had been coming back with good news. It didn't take long, and he landed near the busy entrance with a noticeable thud. Emergency vehicles parked outside, unloading the injured prisoners, and bodies respectfully covered up as they are carted inside for the morgue. A few of the staff did a double take on his presence, but they were quick to refocus. He offers his signature smiling, nodding in understanding and greeting at the few glances thrown his way. All Might has yet to see any signs of personnel who survived the attack on the prison. That didn't mean anything, they could be inside already. The bulky man walks in, thankful that the automatic doors were large enough to accommodate people like him. People were running by, in a hurry to get to their destination. The whole hospital was in chaos. He reached the waiting room after a few excuse me, sorry, whilst navigating the halls, and spots the familiar updo of blonde hair, his back turned towards him. Next to him sat Principal Nizu. Ah, that saves me the trouble. All Might announces his presence. Mike was on his feet in a heartbeat, while Nizu remained seated, sipping at a cup of tea he no doubt brought along. All Might. What's going on? I got the gist from some of the staff but the mammal, panda, guinea pig, whatever he is, reaches up to tug on the hero's coat. I believe it would be best if we save that for later, once we know Aizawa-san is okay. Leave it to him to read into the situation, it was probably written all over his face. Nonetheless, All Might opens his mouth to argue. At the very least he could. Nizu raises a paw and shakes his head. One thing at a time. You've barely had time to breathe, All Might. It can wait for now. Tashinori couldn't be more grateful for the principal. He takes a seat, Mike visibly deflating as he follows suit and crosses his arms, his leg bouncing quietly with anxiety. Midoriya's feet touch the ground of his familiar room, and he slumps, sighing out quietly. His arm is a throbbing mess of pain. He should have asked if Kuro had anything while he was being patched up. Alas, it slipped his mind given the focus of his mistakes today. He'll have to ask later. First things first. He quickly grabs a change of clothes, discarding the mask onto his bed as he carefully undid the sling. He hisses. After a few minutes, he manages to get the suit unzipped, dropping to his knees and tossing it and the mask under the bed behind a few boxes he kept there for storage. Breathing from the exertion, Midoriya wipes the sweat off his brow and carefully stands up, grabbing the sweater and baggy sweats. Suddenly it hits him. What the F was he going to tell Mom? In all the chaos, he had forgotten about his mother. There was no hiding this from her, not if he wanted to get back to training with All Might as quickly as possible. The sling was necessary. He groans, rubbing his face. Maybe he should tell her. The training. And he could explain it away that he strained his arm. Yeah, that could work. That All Might was training him. A small spark of hope, pride, and bit of pettiness bundled up in his chest. It's a good cover. His mom would only question the injury for but a moment, overridden by the shock and surprise upon hearing her son was training with the #1 hero. The look on her face is going to be priceless. Giddiness swelled within, and he grins to himself, doing his best to shimmy into his clothes without jostling his arm too much. Done, he redoes the sling carefully and sighs in relief. Bing! The notification diverts his attention to the phone on his bed. He swipes it up, tapping his passcode before opening his texts with one hand. He hums curiously. Akio, hey, how's it going? Not bad. He types with his thumb and sends. 3 dots appeared along the bottom, so he waits. Sure enough. Cool. Wanna hang out tomorrow? Midoriya pauses to think it over. Why not? Sure, laughing face. Let's meet up at the park and we can decide from there. Fist bump emoji. Sounds good to me. Fist bump emoji. He couldn't help the smile, suddenly looking forward to something calming. Villains must take breaks too, after all. And after today, well, he feels like he deserves it. The painful throbbing in his arm reminds him, and Midoriya tosses the phone back onto the bed, exiting his room. He heads down the hall to the bathroom, shutting the door behind him and ruffling through the medicine cabinet for some painkillers. He pops 4 into his mouth, turning on the faucet and ducking his head sideways to catch the running water. The sound of a door and the rustling of groceries announces the presence of his mom, and sure enough, a muffled, "Izuku, I'm home," comes through from downstairs. Perfect. He peeks his head out, glancing down the hall towards the stairs. Okay. He shouts back and gives himself one last look over through the mirror. There's a bruise on his cheek, ugly, but he was lucky to have gotten away without swelling. With a deep breath of anticipation, he smiles to himself and shuffles out of the bathroom. Sue, don't freak out," he calls, heading down the steps and pausing at the bottom, trying to catch the figure of his mother in the kitchen. Was sort of hard to see from here. Goodness, Izuku, that doesn't bode well. Telling me not to freak out? Inko's tone of voice started to get all pitchy with concern. Don't tell me you fell again. I swear if it's that Bakugou I'm dashed. No. Midoriya decides then and there to step into the kitchen, sheepishly chuckling. She turns around, a frown on her lips before she completely freezes, cutting herself off from whatever she was going to say next. Inko stares at her son for the longest moment. Oh my god, Izuku, what happened? She cries out, causing Midoriya to wince and a pang of guilt and shame piercing through his chest. He stumbles over his words, the confidence from earlier gone. Oh no. She has that look on her face. Mom, W, I'm okay. I promise. Inko rushes forward, mindful of his arm but squeezing him to her. My baby. She pulls away, checking him over frantically. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, and then a flash of anger overtook her expression. He knew exactly what she was thinking. Mom, it wasn't Kakin. She stops, hands on his shoulders whilst giving him a stern and hard stare. Her eyebrows furrow in confusion, seemingly believing him after a moment, and she wipes at her eyes with a sniffle. Then who? Midoriya sighs, scratching at his cheek nervously. You might want to sit down,